Hello and welcome. I'm Pip Tomson and you are watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Putin threatens to target so-called decision-making centres in Kyiv with new Oreshnik missiles as the city suffers energy blackouts after an overnight attack. Pointing the finger, Hezbollah and Israel accuse one another of violating the ceasefire, which came into effect just yesterday. And a genuine Mexican standoff. The country's president denies agreeing with Donald Trump over migration plans at the US border. Our top story tonight. Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to target what he calls decision-making centres in Kyiv with their new hypersonic Oreshnik missiles. Speaking at a security summit in Kazakhstan, Putin suggested Russia was forced to use these missiles in response to the UK and US permitting Ukraine to strike deep inside Russian territory. He also praised President-elect Donald Trump, calling him a smart politician. For more on this, I'm joined from Moscow by our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Hello to you, Dasha. Thanks for talking to me. Dasha, what did you make then of Putin's praise of Donald Trump, and is it genuine?
Well, indeed, we have heard the Russian president once again calling President-elect Donald Trump an experienced and smart politician. The Russian president has said he was astounded by how Trump reacted to all of the attempts of the assassination. He said that was very strong and he was genuinely surprised by how Trump has been reacting to that. He also has said that there have been disgusting, as he described those, attacks against the family of Donald Trump, and he said that he believes that Donald Trump is still in danger. He said, though, that he expected Donald Trump to be smart enough and to take all the precaution measures. So definitely we are hearing not for the first time the Russian president praising the US president-elect Donald Trump. And what we understand is that there is hope that with the new American administration coming to the Oval Office, there could be some change in terms of policies. Even though officially Moscow says it doesn't have any sort of illusions, we understand there is the understanding in Moscow that the outgoing administration of Joe Biden is trying to leave as bad as legacy as possible to Trump administration to deal with, especially when it comes to Ukraine.
Overnight, Dasha, Russian missiles hit Kyiv's power grid, leaving around 1 million people without power. Winter is fast approaching. Portable generators now appearing on the streets. Some areas facing days without power. This is the worst possible time to strike, isn't it?
Well, we understand from what the Russian side is saying that that was the strike against the military facilities of Ukraine, the military-industrial complex. And obviously, with the winter conditions, anything that affects the lives of the people in terms of heating is making it even more complicated. But what we have heard from the Russian side, that this was an attack against the Ukrainian military, and that was an attack in response to the use of US and UK supplied long-range missiles that have been targeting the Russian sovereign territory. So we've heard the Russian president confirming that there have been 19 missiles, over 100 drones last night that attacked the Ukrainian territory, hitting 17 targets in Ukraine. And Moscow says that some of the weapons that have been employed involve hypersonic Kinzhal, Zircon complexes, and warns once again that Moscow could actually once again conduct the testing of its Oreshnik experimental weapon in so-called combat conditions. Moscow insists that those tests have been in response to the Ukrainian strikes, but also notes that if there are many Oreshnik missiles attacking one place at the same time, then and the level of devastation could be comparable to that of the nuclear weapon. Having said that, the Russian president also insisted that Moscow has started the serial production of these Oreshnik missile complexes, saying that the threat of the use of Western weapons against Russia is still very high, and noting that Ukraine has attempted to target even Moscow and St. Petersburg.
OK, Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thanks very much for talking to me. To the Middle East now, and both Hezbollah and Israel have accused one another of violating the ceasefire just one day after it came into effect. Israeli tanks opened fire on several targets in southern Lebanon, who they claim attempted to cross into the buffer zone areas along the border. Hezbollah accused the Israelis of violating the ceasefire by attacking civilians returning to their homes in the border villages. Here's a reminder of what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said during the ceasefire announcement.
The duration of the ceasefire depends on what will happen in Lebanon. In full understanding with the United States, we maintain full military freedom of action. If Hezbollah violates the agreement and tries to arm itself, we will attack. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what will happen in Lebanon. In full understanding with the United States, we maintain full military freedom of action. If Hezbollah violates the agreement and tries to arm itself, we will attack.
For more on this, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by our correspondent, Sarah Coates. Hello to you, Sarah. Israel's military says it has fired on suspects. Hezbollah is vowing to continue its resistance. We're only hours into this ceasefire and already it looks very shaky. What's your assessment?
It certainly is. Hello there, Pip. Both sides are trading blame, saying that this ceasefire has been violated. And we do need to remember it is less than 2 full days after it actually came into effect. Now, there have been a number of incidents, especially around this border region. We do know that Israeli forces have fired at what they say are suspects who are approaching this area that they are calling a no-go zone. Now, there has been another incident that was announced by the Israeli military over just the last few hours. It said that it struck a Hezbollah compound in Lebanon after saying that they identified terrorist activity in that compound where rockets are deployed. So certainly what we can potentially expect is more of this if the Israelis believe that they are seeing potentially the movement of weapons. So major signs of trouble already. And for the second day running, the Israeli Defense Forces have imposed this curfew on residents in Lebanon who are south of the Litani River. They are not allowed to move from 5 p.m. local time until 7 a.m. local time. So, of course, once again, only less than 2 full days into this ceasefire and things are not looking great.
Sarah, thousands of people are still trying to return to their homes. Many of their homes have been destroyed. With those homes being right on the border, exactly how safe is it for them?
Yeah, that is exactly right. We are talking here about around 1 million people who have been displaced. They've been displaced for a couple of months now, and they just want to go home. Now, we do need to remember once again that these Israeli forces, they are still stationed down in these southern regions on this border area. And this is why the Israeli military has put out these statements telling people not to move around, not to go there, not to go back home, saying it is simply not safe enough to do so. Now, the Lebanese military has already begun deploying to this southern region, but it is very unclear as to how many days, potentially weeks, it may actually take for the Israeli forces to withdraw from this southern area. But really, for these people who've been displaced for just so long from these villages, they want to go home. And for the people that have already made it there, a lot of these people have been saying that they don't have much to come back to.
And if we turn our attention to the northern Israeli border, people there, a lot of them, are too scared to return to their properties amid fears that Hezbollah have not been sufficiently weakened.
You're certainly right, Pip. There really is not a lot of trust in the Israeli government. I've spent quite a lot of time up in these northern areas over the past few months, and most of the people there that I've spoken to have told me exactly that. They think they have to fend for themselves. They can't trust anyone but themselves. And I've actually just got off the phone to one of my contacts, actually asking him about the situation. He's right now in Misgav, right on the border there with Lebanon. He said people throughout the day have been coming back to their homes to see basically what is left of them, to do a little bit of cleaning up, but they're not staying there for long. They're leaving pretty quickly because they believe that the security situation simply doesn't allow for them to stay there any longer than that. And other people that I've spoken to really over the course of the last few weeks and months, they say they're not going to move back there at all. They don't find that the Israeli government can provide that security solution for them to actually move back to these northern regions. So it really will not be a clear picture for anyone on the ground right now. It'll take some time to see as to whether these people do go back and whether they do rebuild and whether these communities, again, can be the communities that they were. So certainly a very fragile situation on the ground. And we have just heard from the IDF Home Front Command that it has changed the directive for central and northern Israel, and that is their freedom of movement restriction has now been lifted. This gatherings can actually be larger now and people can more freely move around. But in terms of the north, people are still staying away, Pip.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thanks very much. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Former British soldier Daniel Khalif, who escaped from Wandsworth prison by clinging to the underside of a prison van, has been found guilty of spying for Iran. The court heard that during the nationwide manhunt in September last year, Khalif communicated with his handlers. The former Lance Corporal claimed he wanted to be a double agent when he joined the army aged 16. Australia has become the first country to ban under-16s from having social media accounts. The law, which comes into force in November next year, will make platforms like TikTok, Instagram and X liable for up to 50 million Australian dollars if they allow children under the age limit to possess an account. At least 27 people have died in Indonesia after flash flooding and landslides hit the island of Sumatra. Heavy rain hit the area last week, with extreme weather expected to continue until the end of the year. And a 20-year-old hiker who vanished for 5 weeks in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia has been found alive. Sam Bonastic endured temperatures as low as -20 Celsius after being reported missing last month. Mr. Bonastic was taken to a nearby hospital to recover, where he was identified. To the US now, and Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has denied claims made by Donald Trump that a deal has been struck to stop Mexican migrants crossing the US border. Earlier this week, Trump told his followers Sheinbaum had agreed to stop migration through Mexico. But Sheinbaum's response suggested her priority was not to close the borders, but to respect human rights. It comes days after the president-elect's pledge to add a 25% tax tariff onto Mexican goods arriving in the United States. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent, Tony Waterman, who's in Austin, Texas. Hello to you, Tony. Great to see you. So let's clear all this up, shall we? They spoke on the phone. Trump said it was a wonderful conversation, yet their accounts appear wildly different.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Shane Baum also said that it was an excellent call. But you're right. Beyond that, the details of this call just don't seem to be aligning. So in this social media post on Wednesday night, Donald Trump said that Shane Baum had agreed to immediately stop the flow of migrants to the U.S. southern border, saying that would effectively close the U.S. Southern border. But just a couple of hours later, Shane Baum issued a social media post of her own saying that it is not Mexico's position to close borders, but to build bridges between governments and between peoples and to respect human rights. So it seems as if they are a bit at odds. Now, if this were true, everything that Trump had said, it would have been a major diplomatic and political victory for the incoming president, who ran his campaign on anti-immigration and has said that he's going to use tariffs to implement his policies. As you mentioned earlier this week, he said that he'd slap a 25% tariff on all goods coming not just from Mexico, but also from America's northern neighbor, from Canada, unless those governments agreed to stop the flow of illegal migrants and also drug trafficking. So it doesn't seem as if these details of this call are exactly lining up.
What has Mexico been doing so far to tackle migration at the US border?
Well, late last year, as we were seeing these record number of migrants starting to hit and cross the U.S. southern border, the U.S. and Mexico actually struck a cooperation agreement. And I have to say it was under pretty intense pressure from the Biden administration. And Mexico agreed to beef up its immigration enforcement. So its immigration agency, along with local police and even at times the Mexican military, have been increasing the number of patrols that they are doing along these well-trodden migration routes. They have also set up these checkpoints along highways. They are searching buses. They are searching trains for migrants that are trying to make their way to the U.S. southern border. And on a monthly basis, they are rounding up about 100,000 people, individuals that in theory would have made it to the U.S. southern border. Now, Mexico doesn't have the money and it does not have the legal standing to actually deport most of these individuals back to their home countries. So what it has been doing is that it has been busing and has been flying these people to the very southern part of Mexico, right along that Mexico-Guatemala border, where encampments have sprung up. They are starting to spread, and it's costing the Mexican government a lot of money. So there's a lot of questions around how sustainable of a model this is. But I think by and large, experts agree that it is because of Mexico that the number of apprehensions that we have seen at the U.S. southern border, which have dropped 77% from this time last year, that is largely due to the efforts that Mexico has undertaken in conjunction with Biden administration policies that have made it more difficult for asylum seekers to enter the United States and easier for border officials to deport them.
Tony Waterman in Austin, Texas. Thanks very much for talking to me. Sticking with Donald Trump now, who could shake up the United Nations, potentially exacerbating the organisation's well-publicised financial problems. Earlier this year, the Secretary-General described the UN's cash problems as a full-blown liquidity crisis. During his first term, the president-elect withdrew from several UN agencies, and analysts suspect he's likely to do so again once he is sworn in this coming January. Correspondent Mitch McCann reports from New York.
Mr. Secretary General.
Donald Trump once proclaimed the United Nations is not a friend of democracy, it's not a friend of freedom, and even called it an underperformer. During his first term, he was laughed at during a General Assembly address when talking about how successful his administration was, something that could make his view of the organisation even less favourable.
Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
The president-elect hasn't given much indication of how he plans to approach key foreign policy issues beyond Ukraine and the Middle East, but there is likely to be a sense of trepidation at the UN.
It is going to impact all three pillars of the UN: peace and security, development, and human rights.
Analysts that we spoke to believe one area where the US will have a major impact under Donald Trump is the UN's budget. It's been reported that the UN is already tens of billions of dollars short of the money it needs to run its operations, and that could worsen given America makes the biggest financial contribution to the UN. The last time Donald Trump was in the White House, he cut back funding to a number of UN agencies, including the Population Fund, its program on HIV and AIDS, its Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, and withdrew from the World Health Organization. But there's a warning: if Donald Trump steps back from the UN, others may step forward.
And the most obvious candidate is China, because China is thinking about multilateralism much, much more strategically now than is the United States. And that would be a concern.
Another concern is the legitimacy of the United Nations, particularly the perception that the Security Council was unable to address the types of crises it was originally created to resolve. One analyst suggests that the incoming Trump administration will further position itself as isolationist.
That's going to create more gridlock. It's going to mean that the Security Council and the UN bodies are able to do less, which naturally is going to continue to feed into the discourse around, UN inefficiency or the crisis of confidence, really, that we see in the UN system.
Donald Trump has appointed pro-Israel Congresswoman Elise Stefanik as his ambassador to the UN, an organisation she is reported to have called a den of anti-Semitism, giving an indication of how she might approach the role. Donald Trump's second term brings a sense of unpredictability and unease, and given America's role as a global superpower, the same uncertainty hangs over the United Nations. Mitch McCann, Al Arabiya News, New York.
Let's bring you a few of the top sports stories now. And former Chelsea boss Frank Lampard is the new manager of Coventry City. Lampard will lead the team against Cardiff City this Saturday. NBA's all-time leading scorer LeBron James has achieved his sixth triple-double of the season as the Los Angeles Lakers defeated the San Antonio Spurs 119-101. James was responsible for 16 points and had 11 assists with 10 rebounds as the Lakers made an incredible comeback after suffering 3 defeats in a row. Turning to business now, and the UK's Royal Mail is close to being sold to Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky's EP Group. It's thought the sale could be finalised within the next fortnight. And global taxi service Uber faces an investigation by the US Federal Trade Commission into its subscription plan, Uber One. There's concerns about the enrolment and cancellation procedures of the paid service, which offers members discounts on rides and deliveries. Sticking with business now, because next week industry leaders and policymakers from around the world will attend the UN Convention to Combat Desertification COP16 in Riyadh. Discussions and topics at the event will include improvements to global water insecurity, land degradation and desertification, and the latest research and technologies to address the challenges being faced around the world. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by scientist and the Executive Managing Director of CIGAR, the world's largest global agricultural innovation network, Ismahan Aloefi, who will be attending the event. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to me. Tell me first of all then, what can we expect from this conference? Because it is a big one and there's lots of objectives here. What are the main ones and do you think they can be achieved?
So COP16 on degradation and land degradation and desertification.
You're saying it correctly.
Exactly. No, that's fine.
Degradation.
It's a very important COP. So we just finished the COP on biodiversity in Colombia, in Cali. We just finished 2 weeks ago the COP on climate change in Baku, Azerbaijan, and this is the third one. So we have 3 COPs. And that's what we call Rio Plus, where we have a COP on biodiversity, a COP on climate change, and a COP on land degradation and desertification. And what is important, because this one comes last, is to bring the whole aspect together. It's bring the biodiversity, the climate change, the desertification, because they are not separate, they are not isolated.
And they are all as important as each other.
Yes, they are all very important. And what is very interesting this year is the three of them happened in countries that are, we will call them from either the low or middle income countries. So countries that have different issues than countries from the OECD countries, for example. So Colombia biodiversity was quite interesting, although we didn't come to an agreement on particularly finance for biodiversity. Same thing happens in COP of climate change, where there was a target, but still there wasn't an agreement on replenishing what we call the loss and damage fund. And this particular one, with the push from Saudi, we are really hoping that the initiative that the kingdom has already taken for its own national plan could be really going regionally and globally.
And it's significant as well, isn't it? Because this is the first UN CCD COP that has been held in the Middle East and North Africa region, a region that has vast experience, first-hand experience of these challenges and these problems.
Absolutely. It's really a great time because the whole region, like Saudi as a kingdom, almost more than 90% of its land is desertic. If we look at the whole region, 70% of the land of the region, it's desertic as well, or arid land at least. So the fact that it is happening in the Middle East, the fact that it's happening in the Arab world as well, it's a really quite an opportune time to say how we are adapting ourselves to desertification, how we are stopping desertification, what are the initiatives that we are to stop it. And the most important one will be the Saudi Green Initiative that is aiming to put in place 10 billion trees. And it's already starting super well.
10 billion?
Yes, and there is also, the kingdom is championing what we call MGI, which is Middle East Green Initiative, which is aiming to plant 50 billion trees in the Middle East. So it's very grandiose, it's very high ambition, but it's very good. It's starting with the right plan, looking at the ecosystem and looking at the local species and looking at plants that are not taking too much water, but also have tolerance to heat and tolerance to salinity, for example.
Can I ask you about something that your organisation, SIGAR, is involved in, and that's innovation in agricultural techniques. Now, what are the challenges in that area, and how can you deal with them?
So CGR, as you said it's the largest publicly funded international agriculture science body and network. And what we do, it's creating crops, animals and fish that are better for certain ecosystem, either tropical ecosystem, dry land or super arid land. And we do all of this through innovation. So we are very famous for breeding and genetic innovation, but we are also very known for our new practices in terms of water management, land management, nutrient management, all of the inputs. So the CGR works in the region for the last, I would say, 50 years. We had a center called ICARDA based in Syria, now that has moved from Syria to Morocco, Egypt, and Jordan. But we have other centers that have been in the region, be it for barley, be it for faba bean breeding, be it for sheep and goat breeding, and so on and so forth. So what we are saying, adaptation to climate change, stopping desertification, bringing fertility back to the soil, all of this could only happen with innovation.
Can I ask you about another aspect of this, which really interested me, because it was about how our fashion choices impact the soil, the impact of the fibres that we wear on the soil. And I certainly don't think enough about that.
Yes, we tend to isolate things, and we tend to really to not understand nature properly. So nature, it's millions and billions of creatures living together. So there is a synergetic relationship normally between different microorganisms or species. And when, as a human being, we tend to really to separate things. We tend to put them in little boxes, whereas nature doesn't work that way. And that's where it's very important for us to understand the pathways, but also understand the interconnectedness between different things. So whatever we do here will affect the other species in the other places, or even when you look at the ocean, for example, a movement here could in few hours be on the other side of the planet.
It's a whole chain.
Exactly, it's a whole chain, and that's why it's very important now, nowadays, science understands it better. Science could show it to you much more. So we need really to bring awareness, and we need to invest more in science, because with everything we know very little. So we need to invest more in science to find those solutions that works better, particularly in desertic land, and to stop desertification, because the movement of desertification, it's very scary.
Well, this conference in Riyadh is certainly going to help raise awareness. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to me. Really, really interesting.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ismahan Ella. Here's a reminder now of our top stories. Putin threatens to target so-called decision-making centres in Kyiv with new Oreshnik missiles as the city suffers energy blackouts after an overnight attack. Pointing the finger, Hezbollah and Israel accuse one another of violating the ceasefire, which came into effect just yesterday. And a genuine Mexican standoff. The country's president denies agreeing with Donald Trump over migration plans at the US border. And that's just about it for me on W News. Thank you for your company. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble. From all of us here, a very good night.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence, they've got to have a vote and a say. It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Your Excellency, I want to kick off by just asking you to walk us through how you see the role of public service, because it's not only a family legacy, but it's also a passion.
Just for some context, for those who might not know, my grandfather was Shaheed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Pakistan. He gave us our constitution. He was a voice for the disenfranchised, and he gave his life for his country. He was sent to the gallows by a cruel and conniving dictator who sentenced him for a crime he did not commit. Only for 50 years later, for the same Supreme Court that was stained with his blood to come out and say he was innocent. Only proving my grandfather's last words, which were, "Oh God, help me, for I am innocent." My mother, Shaheed Mohtharma Benazir Bhutto, was the first and youngest female Prime Minister of Pakistan and in the Muslim world. And it was her pursuit for justice for her father which propelled her into politics. And hers was a turbulent journey. She faced police brutality, incarceration, character assassinations, too often used on women, exile. She was basically a mother raising her children, as well as fighting for my father's release from jail, and all the while running and leading the largest political party in Pakistan. So as you can see, it's not an easy legacy to live up to, but it's one that I can't walk away from. For my family, sacrifice, service, fighting for the greater good is all we know. My grandfather used to say that the paradise of God lies under the feet of your mother, but the paradise of politics lies under the feet of the people. And for my family, these are not mere words. This is our ethos.
How do you view the situation for women in Pakistan today?
What I've seen with my mother, and something that I still see today, is that women have to work twice as hard to get half as much acknowledgement as a man. But we are a strong and resilient force. The founder of our nation, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, used to say that there are two great powers in this world. One is the sword and the other is the pen. And there's a great deal of rivalry and competition between the two. But there's a third power, greater than both, and that is our women. So the more time I spend on the ground, I see what a strong force we are. And with regards to the issues that women might be facing, whether it's in Pakistan or globally, you name them, we're facing them. Be it inequality, be it security, be it access to healthcare, education. But we are a strong and resilient force, and the more time I spend on the ground, I see that with the power of the vote, we manage to make our voices heard. And for those who haven't voted or for some reason are outside the voting apparatus, they too, when they join forces and rally together, their voice can make cities come to a standstill.
Yeah. You wear two hats. You're a member of parliament as well as being First Lady. How do you square the two? Because you need to be outspoken for your constituents, and at the same time, sometimes it's difficult to be political.
That's true. I've only recently become First Lady as my father became president, and as a widow, he decided to name his youngest daughter First Lady in order to fill that role and make sure that we have a strong representative for women and women's rights.
Do you feel like you have to hold back?
I have to hold back slightly when I'm in the arena of being the First Lady. But as a member of the National Assembly, when I'm on the National Assembly floor, I will be fighting for my people's rights, needs, and whatever they say to do. I'm their public servant.
Yeah. In discussing your family's legacy, it's impossible not to focus on the fact that politics, as you know, can be deadly. Right now, Imran Khan says he's under threat for his life. How credible, in your mind, are those threats?
I think that anyone who says that their life is in danger is a threat that we need to take seriously. But it is heartening to see. It is heartening to see that all the avenues are open to him. For example, all the courts are there for him to fight his cases. All his needs in jail, whether it be for his newspapers or gym equipment, are being met. And I would not wish anyone in Pakistan to face great difficulty, and I hope he will go through the avenues of the court, and the courts will have their verdict.
Are you confident he will have a fair treatment by the judicial system?
I think so. I do believe that he'll be able to put his case forward, and based on what the evidence says, they'll be able to make their decision.
Talk me through this. You have been a passionate proponent of the need for vaccines, particularly with regards to polio. When you see those in the United States, for example, President-elect Trump's pick, RFK Jr., who's a vaccine skeptic, does that worry you?
Right now, I'm more worried about the issues that Pakistan is facing. I'm sure that the United States has a rigorous campaign before you go to school, you have to get vaccinated. Before any large forums, there need to be vaccinations for your child to make sure that at every stage they get their vaccinations. But with regards to Pakistan, I'm an advocate for polio eradication in Pakistan. I've been their ambassador also for the United Nations and Rotary International. And the challenges we face are greatly different.
Yeah.
And some of in 1994, my mother actually gave me the first oral polio vaccine. And this was when she was Prime Minister at the time, and she often said that as a woman leader, she brought an additional role to her office. She brought that of a mother.
Yeah.
So she spearheaded this campaign across the country. Then I would have to say that the changes in government leads to an issue for us on the ground. We had a period of dictatorship under which the reality of the situation was simply not being reported. We went through another change in government under which all the stakeholders, be it the President, the Prime Minister, the Army Chief of Staff, all believed that this was an important issue and they were determined to eradicate this disease. Then we went through another change of government under which the government at the time did not take this seriously. And when the heads of government don't take this issue seriously of vaccination, there's a trickle-down effect. It trickles down to the bureaucrats, it trickles down to the health ministers, the health systems, all the way down to the health workers on the ground.
Yeah.
That this is not a serious issue. So I would have to say that that is one of the challenges that we're facing. A second challenge is that there was a misuse of our vaccination drive for security reasons, which brought about a lot of mistrust amongst our nation. We had clerics preaching that this vaccine would cause infertility and spreading misinformation. And this is an ongoing process. We have to take them on board as stakeholders and explain to them that this is the same vaccine that the United Arab Emirates uses, this is the same vaccine that Saudi Arabia uses, and they've managed to successfully eradicate this disease. So this is an ongoing process. But as a consequence of these two issues, we've had a lot of targeted attacks on our polio workers. There's been senseless killings of our polio workers on the ground. And our security forces also who are protecting them. And their only crime was that they were trying to fight for our future generation. Their crime was that they wanted to ensure that every single child was vaccinated. So these are some of the issues. And lastly, I would have to say our geography. We're on the border with Afghanistan, and we see a great deal of migration that occurs. And in that process, some children miss our national immunization drives. We've made progresses in this. We've put vaccinators at the border. We've put vaccinators in between cities and in between provinces. So we're determined to try and reach every single child out there. I would have to say that these are some of the challenges we're facing. But if I talk to you about the progress that we're making, I would have to say that, and the successes, I would have to say that every single child vaccinated is a success. Every single child we manage to save from this crippling disease is a success.
Yeah.
And until we reach the ultimate goal of a polio-free Pakistan, these are the successes that I need to hold on to and build on.
You mentioned geography. Obviously, you're in a position at this point where geography has a great deal of impact on not just foreign policy, but obviously on the situation for women. How devastating, in your mind, was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, your neighbor? Because at this point, it seems as if the international community doesn't or isn't able to help those women. We gave them great promise, and then we abandoned them.
With regards of the way the exit from Afghanistan was conducted, I think that record speaks for itself. It's devastating to see, but we have to have faith in the Afghan government and their systems to try, and we have to ensure that as a country like Pakistan, who it's our neighbor, we can try and encourage them to, take on board our women and perhaps not go with such stern language when it comes to them. But it's also that they are their own country, and we can't dictate them to tell them what they should do.
Yeah. Do you happen to think that there's something that the international community could do to help women there that they're not doing? Is there a pressure that we could exert?
I think that it's a very difficult situation because in the manner in which they stayed and they exited, it causes great difficulty for anyone in the world to dictate to them what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah.
So I think engagement with the Afghan government is the best option we have.
Yeah. Tell me this, when you think back to the legacy of your mother, not just as Prime Minister, but also as a parent, what are some of the lessons?
As I get older, even 16 years on from her assassination, I realize that there was a lesson in everything she said and did. Yeah. And despite the greatest odds, she managed to endure with incredible elegance, dignity, and grace. And if you've ever seen Sucker Jail and the conditions she was in, you would see how difficult that was. So in the face of adversity, I can only hope and pray to have half as much elegance, dignity, and grace as she did.
"16 years on, what is your advice to the women in this room as they look to take their place, not just as women, as mothers potentially, but also as those who are leading corporations, excited about being entrepreneurs and startups, and also going into politics?"
My message to young women would be to believe in yourself, remain steadfast in your values, never underestimate the power of your voice. Leadership is not about privilege and position. It's shaped by purpose and persistence. And we must remember that the road ahead will be challenging, but we must embrace education, foster empathy, commit ourselves to uplifting all those around us. True leadership lies in service to others and the pursuit for justice, opportunity, and equality for all. My message to the younger generation would be that you are the architects of a brighter future.
Walk me through this one. As women, we often discuss how we are not just subject to the regular standards. We are also subject to even higher standards in what we wear and what we say and how we do our hair. Do you believe that that's evolving?
I would hope and pray that this evolves. However, I will give you an example. Well, it's heartening to see the number of women leaders across the world today.
Yeah.
I still think that we need to face issues that our male colleagues don't necessarily need to face. I can give you an example. I was in an interview with a prominent international news organization, and at the time we were talking about the crackdown on our party, the fear I had for my father's life in jail. This was his 2019 persecution against him, not to be confused with the 90s persecution against him. And at the end of the interview, I still get asked, "But do you like to cook?" So as women,
what do you like to cook?
But as women, we have to still prove today that yes, we can cook, we can clean, and we can lead. And we must simply have to endure and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, the unfair criticism I think that we've seen for women politicians across the board in the West as well. I mean, Hillary Clinton, not attacking her words per se, or challenging her words, but challenging her choice of outfit. Yeah.
I try to model my outfits on the basis of my mother, and it brings me a lot of comfort to have her white dupatta style around me. It makes me feel that I have her with me at all times.
And embrace. And just to close out our session, in your mind, where are we today in this region? Because the extraordinary strides made right here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, for example, are inspiring, but the region still has more to do.
I think, number one, we must acknowledge the United Arab Emirates. Just look at this platform today. Many of our neighbors don't have this platform, and this is truly a global event. People from all across the world, all across nations, everyone has an inspiring story, a history. So I think that we need more platforms like this, and hopefully the region around us will also evolve into understanding the importance of women, giving them an opportunity, giving them a glimpse into public service and seeing how well they shine.
Yeah, and speaking of that glimpse into public service, what would be your suggestion to those in the audience today who are looking potentially to go into public service?
I believe that the world is your oyster and there is an opportunity everywhere.
Yeah.
And especially in the United Arab Emirates, just look at the number of cabinet members. Look at the people in His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid's office. The number of women has grown every single year. And I think that other countries around the world need to model this.
Yeah. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hadley.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Irene, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya. I want to kick off by asking you to sort of walk me through how you view your role within NATO, because women today are under pressure in various parts of the world and, frankly, in the West.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to have this moment of exchange about a very important topic, not only women in NATO, but I would say on women across the globe and about our rights and the general pushback, I would say, that we are facing today. The role I have at NATO, I'm the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, is not new. I'm the fourth Special Representative. The position was established in 2012. But after 12 years, I have to say that despite the progress that we have made within the alliance, there is still much to do. Of course, the work I do within NATO is around the mandate of the alliance. So it's specific about the role of women and peace and security. So we do not cover other issues. But of course, what we do contributes to advancing gender equality. And it is also stated in our latest strategic concept endorsed in Madrid in 2022 that advancing gender equality is a reflection of the common values of the alliance. So what I do is really to look at everything that the alliance does to make sure that gender perspectives are included. What does this mean? It means that every time we take a decision, both at political and a military level, we have to make sure that we consider the diversity of the population. Population is made by half by men and the other half by women, so we cannot take decision without considering that security is perceived in a different way by men and women.
No doubt. How concerned are you when you see President-elect Trump's pick for defense saying that women shouldn't be in combat roles?
This is a topic that has been discussed over the decades around the globe. The hope was that we had overcome the barriers, the cultural barriers. Certainly we have overcome the legal barriers. So everywhere across allies and also in our partners, countries, women are part of the armed forces. In different extents, I would say across NATO allies, we have an average of 12%. So if we look at the population, as I said, 50% made by women, there is still a big gap to cover this percentage. I think that we still have a lot of work to overcome cultural barriers and change the mindset. We are not all at the same stage. So this conversation will certainly be put at the table, but there is a general consensus that women have to be part of the military forces. And we have proof that nowadays, if we look at Ukraine, how incredible women are fighting now on the front line. Since the full-scale invasion, a lot of women have joined voluntarily, and that's very important to say, that they were not obliged to do it. They are around 60,000 now in the armed forces. More than 40,000 are civilians, but the rest are military, and 5,000 are fighting on the front line alongside with their male colleagues.
If the United States rolls back women's role in the military, and I mean in combat positions, does that weaken the NATO alliance and the NATO mission?
I'm not expecting this change to happen. Of course, I'm expecting maybe some conversation around this, but there is a consensus. There are policies in place. This year in Washington, D.C., and our big yearly summit, we endorse a new women, peace and security policy. When we endorse a policy, 32 allies come together and they agree on what is on the policy.
Including the United States.
Including.
Yeah.
Indeed. And this lasts for 5 years. And the policy states very clearly that increasing participation of women in all peace and security efforts, both on the diplomatic and in the military side, is what we have to do if we want to enhance our operational effectiveness. Yeah. And this is where my work leads, to the implementation of this policy that will be translated next year in a new action plan. We are working on it. And this is where I will concentrate my efforts.
Yeah. Talk to me about this. You mentioned Ukraine and the role of women there in combat positions that they've taken on as an act of necessity. There's a lot of conversation, of course, about how that war may come to a conclusion. In your mind, are women better prepared to take on roles not just in the military now, but also in government in Ukraine?
I think as historically we have seen how wars change the role of women within the society. They open up different possibilities because men go to the front line. In this case, the front line is both physical and also on the space, because we see the war in Ukraine played on the hybrid space and cybersecurity, but also with very old technique on the front line. Women have filled the position in Ukraine as they did in the past during the First World War and Second World War. We see incredible women in politics at governmental level. We see women on the front line and covering all roles in the society. Even in the defense industry recently, women have stepped up and take more positions. So I think this has worked as an accelerator for the society, and I expect that women will continue to play an important role in the resolution of the conflict and in the post-conflict era, where we hope a just peace will happen soon, and we will see women to continue to take their important position.
When are we going to see a NATO Secretary General who is a woman? Because I know that was something that was mooted at the time, at the last round of conversations about this.
There was a lot of conversation about this. We need to find the best candidates. I will always say there are some requirements, and requirements are that the Secretary General has to be a former Prime Minister or a President. And this is where the conversation has to be broader.
Yes.
Because the point is, why don't we have more women in politics covering this position? Because automatically then we could have more candidates for the position of the Secretary General. So now we have just welcomed our new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, but as you might heard, this week he announced a Deputy Secretary General, who is a woman and from North Macedonia, and she will join us in supposedly a few weeks. And she's the second one in the history, so it's already a progress. And I think maybe next one could be.
Could it be Giorgia Meloni?
You read in my mind, because the conversation we had, it's also about the South and the rotation. You know, in alliance,
Exactly.
we're trying to rotate, and sometimes, I mean, we see a tendency to have a Secretary General coming from the northern countries, and there was a conversation about the South, but the requirements didn't come together. So one option could be to change the requirements, and the other is to see more prime minister in the South. So, of course, Giorgia Meloni could be a candidate in the future.
Walk me through this. Today, the rest of this region continues to reel over what we've seen happen in Afghanistan, and I'm talking about the subjugation of women and girls. Obviously, that was an area of serious concern for NATO, and when coalition forces were there. In your mind, what is the responsibility of NATO today to those women that we promised a future and then abandoned?
That's a difficult conversation to take. You know that NATO operates under mandates, and when we operate out of our area of responsibility, we do based on resolution of the United Nations Security Council. We withdraw, the mission is over. So as an alliance, we do no longer have a responsibility there collectively because we are no longer present. But of course, allies, individually and bilaterally and in different contexts such as
and as human beings.
Yes, and they continue to provide support. The situation is very worrisome. There are no words to describe what happened. And I think that individually, as I said, a human being and with our respective roles at national level, we have to continue to speak out about what is happening there and to fight for women's rights, because the silence will really put them, you know, in a we will forgive about them, even if we don't do. But in the global conversation, you see, if you read the newspaper, it doesn't really come on the news so often.
What do you think is the solution there in your mind? Because obviously there is an ability of nations who are giving aid to Afghanistan to exert pressure on them.
If I could have a solution, you know, I would try to put this, implement it. I found that extremely difficult. What I'm doing on my side is to continue dialogue with women from Afghan and see if there is a way to support. One of the focus is always how to train women to create space for dialogue for them in terms of dialogue also with the Taliban or mediation processes. And I know that there are several women who are also present in Doha a few years ago that continue the dialogue and try also to train younger generation to make sure that they will have the possibility to play a role and to exercise their rights.
When you come to a forum like this one, based in the United Emirates, a country that has promoted women not just to positions in government, also mandated their participation on boards in the private sector, are you encouraged by what you see and how the region is evolving?
Indeed, I am very much. I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to engage in person, because I think this is the best way when then you have a concrete example that you can share. When people ask me, what do you do? It's difficult to explain then if you don't have stories to tell. And changing the narrative is what we absolutely have to do. So it's a very positive example, and I'm really looking forward to attending the forum tomorrow.
Tell me this, what is missing in your mind from the global dialogue for women? Because when we speak about this from a business perspective, we talk about quotas and we talk about a number of women on boards. One woman feels alone, 2 women has a friend, and then 3 women can make a change. But in your mind, from a governance perspective, from a security perspective, what needs to change?
I think it's a question of the cultural change I was mentioning earlier. And it's about gender, what we call gender-responsive leadership. We focus a lot on the participation of women, but we still find resistance, cultural barriers. And sometimes women are there because government decide to do, and then speak at global level, not referring to the local situation. But at the end, there is no real willingness to integrate. So it's more a token than a reality. So I think that what we have to look is the change of mindset of who is in power today, which in the normality are men. So we have to look into what we call the gender-responsive leadership to say that to train, to dialogue with both men and women together, to understand the benefit that the entire society will have if women take on more position at high level. It's not for women, it's not helping women to do something, when they say, I'm helping my wife. No, it's not about this. Because in the moment where the dynamic changes, men will benefit from this different dynamic. They will have more time for the children. They have more time even for discussion and conversation, not under the pressure. And the solution that will be found will be better solution because they will really bring the perspective of the entire society. So this topic of the gender-responsive leadership is something I advocated for and I put as a first goal of the new policy at NATO, because I think that in a male-dominated environment, while we work to increase the number of women, we have also to work with the men who are present to make sure that we can reach the same high-quality solution in a shorter time.
Bring them with us.
Yes.
Irene, it's great to have you here at Al Arabiya. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Sean, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
So 1,000 days into this conflict and the war in Ukraine has not been won. In your mind, what are the next steps?
Well, I think you almost have to step back a little bit from that and go, what is achievable now? For the last 2.5 years of the conflict, there's been a view, certainly from the Ukrainian view, we will get rid of Russia. We've been fighting them for 300 years. They've constantly been trying to destroy our language, our communities, our culture, our families. We will prevail, as we always do. But actually, on a visit back there 3 or 4 weeks back, there was much more of a sense of awareness. And that prospect of victory, if that is clearing out Russians from every corner of Ukraine, that seems to be fading fast. And actually, there does feel a much more of a palpable sense of how do we emerge from this with a positive story, positive narrative? How do we emerge from this with our security and our border secure of what remains? How do we rebuild our country? And how do we live, grow and live our life beyond this? Because it's a terrible price that's being paid at the moment. And it's very difficult to see how Ukraine can win in the conventional sense. It's also very difficult to see how Russia can win. And therefore, how do you bring this awful situation to an end? And that involves compromises which are uncomfortable to talk about, because all of them have horrible implications. But the bloodshed is just devastating, and on both sides, and that somehow is not sustainable.
How closely tied in your mind is this fatigue that you saw on the ground in Kyiv, for example, in Ukraine more broadly, to the election of Donald Trump in the United States?
One of the questions I asked when I was out there, I had a whole load of questions to ask people. I said, what do you feel about Donald Trump? And they were, of course, awfully very polite because they know how heavily dependent they are on American aid, particularly. But when you push them a bit, perhaps over a beer, one of the things they said, you do realise we've been fighting Russia for 300 years. Do you really think that one Western politician in 24 hours is going to solve this? And it was a really poignant moment. It felt like, as a Westerner, I was almost trying to impose my will on them, as it were. And it's plain that that's not going to be the answer. I think the trouble is there's lots of implications here. The Trump effect, as a bit of a student of history, if you look back when he came in on the first term, I'm going to build a continuous war with Mexico. Didn't quite manage that. I'm going to bring peace to the Middle East. Didn't quite do that. And I'm going to sort out that horrible little man from North Korea. Didn't do that either. But what it did do is a clear intent of where his focus was going to be. And therefore, it's pretty clear, although solving the war in 24 hours is clearly not possible, it's pretty clear where his intent is. Is it to continue supporting Ukraine until the end, or is it about trying to draw the war to an end in some way? What that looks like, probably only President Trump-elect actually knows what that looks like.
Less than 2 weeks from that historic election in the United States, and you have the G20 now reflecting in their statement less of a we must win, continuous and unfiltered or unadulterated support for Ukraine, and also, of course, a realization on the part of European governments that if they're going to do this, they're going to have to go it alone. And when they look at their budgets and their balance sheets, it's just not going to be possible. No, and if you look at it from literally big picture stuff, the Europeans and the Americans are given about the same amount of money. But if you look at about military aid, the US provides far more because it's got far deeper pockets, it's got far bigger inventories, far bigger war stocks. And therefore, it would be almost impossible for Europe to match. They could potentially dig deeper into their pockets, but it isn't the money that's required. It's manpower and weapons. And those weapons, you can't nip down to the local supermarket and buy them. They take ages to be built, and we've emptied our war stock of those weapons. I think what's interesting from geopolitical, though, again, people are very scared about the Trump effect. They've talked about him walking away from NATO, I think actually there are some things which I think we've just, although at times the message... Wasn't he the greatest thing to happen to NATO, though? Well, in a way, that is my view, that, we had only a third of NATO members were paying their way. And that's not right. As a nation who also pays their way, we don't pay as much as America do, but America spends double the amount proportionally on defence and far more actually in purely quantums. But 2/3 of NATO weren't actually paying their way. Well, why should they enjoy the benefit of security? Since those Trump days, we've now got over 2/3 of NATO paying their way. Is that enough? No. But I do think so. Some of the Trump rhetoric is designed, I think, to say, look, America will look after China. Russia's right on your doorstep. You're feeling the heat there. Europe, step up and sort it out. And in a way, we're seeing that with Poland, who've doubled their defence budgets. Most of Europe's sweating a little bit, going, if America's not going to sort this out, we need to. What does that look like? And I think that's created a really interesting dynamic in NATO. And it's a harsh reminder that 3 decades of sort of post-Cold War peace dividend are well and truly over. We have a new Secretary General. He's coming from the Netherlands, Mark Rutte. It's a gentleman I've interviewed on a number of occasions. That's a country that hasn't been paying their 2%. There are questions, of course, about what kind of leadership he's going to bring to the organization. In your mind, does this leave, with the election of Donald Trump, perhaps a window for NATO to become even more cohesive? I think it'll be a defining moment for NATO. I have to say, part of my scepticism is that if you measure military capability by mass, NATO is a resounding success. You add up all the tanks, add up all the aircraft, it's fantastic. The problem with a committee is that you can only move at the pace of the slowest. And I think we've already found with Ukraine, providing weapons for Ukraine has not been something that all nations agree with. The UK was the first to offer tanks. There was lots of reluctance to offer tanks. And the danger is that NATO, actually, when the UK was providing Storm Shadow, for example, long-range missiles, and America turned around and went,
I think you probably don't want to do that until we've all agreed it. And as a result, Putin's sat there watching, laughing. He lives in an autocracy where he makes a decision, it happens. Yeah. NATO has some huge benefits, but it's also demonstrating some significant challenges. And there is a view that what do we do if President Putin decides to have a go at Lithuania or Latvia? NATO members, but would NATO roundly sign up for a nuclear war based on going into those countries? Now, the obvious political answer is, of course they would. But I think Putin's already seeing, with his sabre rattling, which he's doing regularly, just how nervous the West is, just how nervous. And by forming an alternative to NATO, that sort of axis of evil, potentially North Korea, Iran, China, he's already starting to form an axis of body that's saying we can challenge the West, because they might look big and strong, but actually the glue that ties them together isn't that strong at all.
When you think about how this is all going to look 20 years from now, in your mind, did the West sell Ukraine a raw bill of goods in terms of what they were going to do, what they would be willing to do, and what they could afford to do in support of Ukraine?
So one of the questions I asked when I was out in Ukraine was about the West's support. And what was fascinating, again, they were very polite initially, but their memory of the fall of the Soviet Union, their memory, I mean, if you remember, for the viewers particularly, Ukraine became the third largest nuclear power in the world because the former Soviet Union had forward deployed its weapons into Ukrainian soil. So when the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had all these nuclear weapons. They didn't have the launch codes, but they had the weapons. And as a result, America, the UK, Russia sat down with Ukraine and said, look, it's not healthy for you to have those weapons. We'll guarantee your sovereignty, all of us, if you give up those nuclear weapons. So the Budapest Memo of 1994 was signed. And 20 years later, Putin rips it up and goes into Crimea. Now, where the Ukrainians remember that period is they were coerced. They were forced into signing that. And the only reason they agreed to sign it was because you, the West, guaranteed our security. When we called on that insurance policy, nobody was there.
We've shown them what that's worth.
And I think it's very easy, yes, to criticise Putin for what he did, but he went into Crimea, saw that the West didn't actually do anything, wrote a couple of stiff letters. Really? Is that really what the security guarantees of the Budapest Memo 94 were about? Now, I wasn't there, you weren't there, you know, but I do understand that it's one thing writing something, it's quite another actually doing something.
And that is part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, we've had technically 20 years to understand Vladimir Putin, to understand his red lines, how far he's willing to go. Most people called it wrong when, you know, the invasion happened. Nobody really thought that he would make that move because economically it didn't make sense. Why would you jeopardize your place in the world order? But he did it, and he did it anyway. And it looks as if now, in a sense, he's going to be able to walk away from this quite successfully, because the conversation now seems to be surrounding how do we end this and allow Russia to save face.
Yeah, that sticks in the throat a bit, doesn't it, about saving face. I think if you would be an idealist, and you know, when I was younger I was an idealist, now I'm much more of a pragmatist.
Now you're a grown-up.
You know, the idealist would say, no, you can't hand Russia a victory, because what will that mean? The flip side of that is that there is a view at the moment that Ukraine is locked into an attritional battle. It is the smaller party. An attritional battle, traditionally the smaller party loses. It's a bit like medieval times. We'll meet on the battlefield, have a cup of tea, and then have a go at each other. The strongest, the most numerous tend to win. Well, this attritional battle, unfortunately, is favouring Russia. They're on the front foot in the Donbass. They're on the front foot in the Kursk region. And therefore, if you continue fighting, one of the risks is that Russia actually makes a breakthrough, and all of a sudden it could be a lot more territory. It potentially could be an endgame for Ukraine completely. And therefore, rather than be an idealist and say, look, we're never going to stop until we win or we lose, is there some other, very unpalatable, but some other solution? And I sensed from my visit, I sensed from a lot of the conversations I have, and I'm still connected to a lot of very well-informed parts of this landscape. And that sense of what does victory look like, they're fading in its
in their
hope
demands
rather than expectation.
Yeah.
Whereas the expectation of we're running out of people, running out of ideas, and Trump's rhetoric may well just be the final nail in we've got to find an alternative way to draw this to a close. The question then is, how does that appease President Zelensky? Part of it is you've got to rebuild your country. Part of it is we're going to need some security guarantees, and I'm not going to accept a signature on a bit of paper. But also for Putin, how do you actually coerce Putin into signing something or agreeing something? You've got to have a sweetener. He's got all the aces at the moment. If you're going to stop, why stop? So in a way, I wouldn't be at all surprised if one of the things that will be discussed behind closed doors is stopping some of the sanctions, returning his place. And that's distasteful, but if that is the price of bringing this conflict to an end, is that a price worth paying? And what are the implications of that for Xi Jinping looking at Taiwan?
Well, it's probably an unavoidable price, considering the fact that, we're talking about budgets, we're talking about economies, we're talking about the U.S. government, who, under Donald Trump, will presumably not be willing to spend as much as they have spent. But interestingly enough, we've seen, obviously, the Biden administration making some last-minute pushes, last-ditch efforts, if you will, to continue their policies towards Ukraine. They've got a couple of months left, and even though he is a lame duck, technically, it doesn't seem as if that's keeping them from continuing to push their agenda. Does that leave perhaps some possibilities for Zelensky?
No. The last 48 hours has been fascinating, as we've talked about. Let's be specific. ATACMS, these army tactical missile systems, which are vaunted as the answer to the Maiden's Prayer. They're a supersonic missile. They go ballistic. They go 200 miles. The downside is they've only got a £500 charge in the middle of them. They cost well over $1 million each, and there's not many of them around.
Yeah.
So they're very effective at surgical strike, but Russia's already moving its fighter jets out of range of those, so they can't be used.
And this has devolved into a drone war as is.
Well, it's also, I think, the short. We tend to talk about drones as being short range. The debate about long-range weapons, that can the West give them, we're running out of them, can we allow them to use them into Russia? It's become a really convoluted conversation about something which, frankly, is not going to change the course of the war. What has been happening behind the scenes is that Ukraine has been saying, OK, we may not be able to give you these long-range weapons, but if we could give you all of the parts, sensors, rocket packs, explosives, and you assemble them, you can assemble something that's much more modern than we could give you. To the West to develop it would mean we'd have to do safety cases, we do lots of safety. You don't have to do any of that. And we've actually seen over the last couple of months Ukraine be a lot more effective at doing deep strikes into Russia.
Yes.
And so the danger is we get this argument seduced about, will the West provide? Actually, this is about, can Ukraine strike deep into Russia? And it is able to do that now. I think the very different question is that these ATACMS, I think, in a way, people say, is this Biden's last? No, it's a really modest step. I think the reason he's done it now, bluntly, is that in the Kursk region, Ukraine has a small enclave. When it went in there in August, it's been pushed out of a third of that enclave. Putin will not want to negotiate whilst there's a Ukraine presence on Russian territory. He's going to do everything possible to get that cleared. He's got 50,000 troops up there, apparently 12,000 North Korean troops as well. He is going to be doing everything. Just imagine the instructions he's giving to his commanders. Don't come back until you've cleared that area.
Yes.
Massive casualties, and therefore what it appears that Biden's going is, we need to help you with that enclave. We're not giving you weapons that you can strike deep within Russia. We're giving you weapons that you can strike in Russia as part of protecting that enclave and supporting, holding out for as long as you can. I think that's far more logical than some knee-jerk against Trump, because frankly, the day Trump comes in, he could sign an order saying, no, you can't use them anymore.
Yeah.
Simple.
And did President Biden undercut Europe?
By doing by putting the weapons in early? I don't buy that. No, the trouble is, this whole weapons thing, I think, is a bit of a non-story. If you need help, and I give you weapons, as long as you use them within the law of armed conflict, I shouldn't actually say, we can't do that with them, but you can do that with them.
But that's been the story of this entire conflict.
I know, but because that's been the story of the conflict, when you then take those restrictions away, you provide Putin with the opportunity to wail and shake the nuclear sabre. I mean, that's the irony of this whole thing, that ultimately there shouldn't have been a story about this. It should have been, here's the weapons, use them as you see fit. And the problem by having now is that if Keir Starmer now makes a thing with the media about suddenly, oh, we're green light on, I think it'll just happen under the radar. I think he'll just say, President Zelensky, you've got the weapons. Nobody's marking your homework and seeing what's happening. We're not going to make an announcement and play to Putin's game. We've always said you can use the weapons. Let's face it, Lord Cameron had originally said you can use those weapons as you see fit. They were reined in because of the US angle. So I don't think that by playing all this out in public, it doesn't help. And I suspect Keir Starmer, rather than going, yes, we're going to confront Putin, is just quietly going to Zelensky, carry on, use the weapons, don't break the law of armed conflict, and we'll continue to support you as best we can.
And so the market chatter that we've heard over the last 24 hours suggesting that this could push President Putin to use nuclear weapons, in your mind, if he was going to do that, he would have already done it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a regular talking about this stuff. I'm grey-haired. I served in the military when we were in the middle of the Cold War. We talked about nuclear weapons. We did nuclear fallout drills on our missions. We were planning one-way missions, never expecting to come back. You know, and then all of a sudden the peace dividend happened. There's nobody around these days that has lived through that time. And the danger is, therefore, Putin knows it's a really effective, sabre to rattle that scares everybody. And it's worked. He keeps saying it, and we step back from the brink. Let's be absolutely clear. If we wanted to stop Russia from invading Ukraine, if we put a no-fly zone in there tomorrow, my colleagues in the air forces would love to have a go at that. Putin struggled against a really old, decrepit air force. Imagine if a 21st century air force to sweep in. He'd be stopped in a heartbeat. We don't want to do that. That's a choice we're making. So we could do it. We've just chosen not to.
Yeah, consistently. In your mind, post-war environment, when we talk about investment in Ukraine, there are investment vehicles at the ready. BlackRock and JP Morgan have one. The idea being, of course, that between the United States and the European Investment Bank, there's going to be billions of dollars worth of investment going into Ukraine. But, of course, that does have implications for insurance, for example, markets, and whether or not, this war is really coming to a close. Security guarantees. Given the lackadaisical way in which we have behaved towards the Ukrainians so far, what kind of security guarantees can they reasonably expect?
It's a great question. I think part of it is there's been a lot of talk about NATO providing it. I have to say it's quite difficult to see how NATO will be the answer. First of all, NATO isn't a club you just come and join. There's all sorts of things. It's a collective. You all have to contribute towards it in some way, militarily, financially, etc. And there's certain standards that I don't think Ukraine will meet for quite some time to come. Quite apart from the fact, you're now Putin, I'm now Zelensky, and we're negotiating an end. If I tell you I'm going to be part of NATO, Putin's going to go, unless that's off the table,
there's no conversation.
There's no conversation. So it's quite difficult to see how NATO is the answer. But that doesn't mean there isn't an answer. There are bilateral, trilateral arrangements that can be made, military bases that are now forward deployed onto Ukrainian soil. There's lots of ways that could make it a lot more difficult for Putin to take a breather for a few years and then start again. Because if he had an American base, a French base, a UK base near the front line of the new border, in whatever that was, that would put a very different dynamic in to the Putin's mind if he thought he was going to take another chunk out of Ukraine anytime soon. So I think there are other ways of providing that security guarantee. I think the financial one is really interesting because at the end of the Second World War, obviously Germany was devastated. That became the powerhouse of Europe.
Yes.
So there is the potential.
Until now.
But there is the potential for Ukraine to be rebuilt and modernised, and this could be the foundations of a brave new future for Ukraine that has had a very difficult 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. A land of opportunity, maybe.
What is your assessment of the sort of European response post-election in the United States? And I'm speaking specifically about the call between Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin and the reaction from other European leaders. Outrage from Zelensky, but outrage from Emmanuel Macron as well.
Europe's in a slightly difficult position, isn't it? I think.
Well, it's a tough one when the French are the ones that are pushing back the most, right? And being less willing to negotiate.
The trouble is, I mean, at its heart, President Trump says it's America first. Actually, that sounds very provocative, but the reality is every country operates with its own national interest at first. Every country.
Yes.
And so not every country will feel the same heat from Russia. There is a view, I mean, let's face it, most of our countries are suffering a bit of a COVID hangover financially at the moment. Therefore, there's a lot of demand for money internally as well as externally. Now, one argument you could say, Russia's a threat, we have to ramp up our defence spending. When I was in the Ministry of Defence, the two driving threats that drove how much money we spent were Russia and China. Russia has now spent itself. It's lost most of its main battle tanks. It is no longer the threat from an equipment perspective that it was before. Worse than that, we were a little bit scared of it. Now we've seen how inept it is and how poor both the equipment is and also how it operates.
But they are rebuilding and reindustrializing
how long
around
will it take
the military
to make that
economy.
happen, though?
Even if it's years. Even if it's years, they're up against what we now see is a Europe that is significantly degraded in terms of its economic power.
Yes, but I think if you do the harsh metrics, the West, even without America, is still far overmatches what Russia has. And it's not just in quantity, it's also in quality. Now, does that mean, would we want to take on Russia because of the nuclear threat? Absolutely not. But it does mean that Russia would have to think twice. It was expecting to walk into Ukraine and over a matter of days take Ukraine. 1,000 days later, it is still suffering huge casualties, lost so much equipment. It is not a very potent military machine. And if President Putin had his time again, I wonder whether he'd play his cards quite the same. We were talking earlier that one of the challenges is it's very difficult to know what his motivation is here. Is it because he wants a big stone statue of himself in the Great Hall, like Peter the Great, that he's been part of rebuilding the Russian Empire? He said he wanted to make Russia great again. It's been a bit of a pariah on the world stage. He said he wanted to stop the expansion of NATO. NATO's expanded as a result of it, and Putin himself found himself indicted by the International Criminal Court. It doesn't feel like a very positive outcome, but if he secures that land bridge, the Donbass and Crimea, despite the casualties, he may gloss over that and declare victory. But I think the oligarchs and everybody who actually provides the power base will be going, you paid a massive price for that. We don't want to do that again, do we?
In your mind, what is the best way to position President Zelensky going into these negotiations?
Well, incredibly difficult, because it doesn't matter how you spin it. Ukraine is on the back foot. They are struggling. They've been heavily reliant on international support. That international support is waning. It's not waxing at the moment. The coffers are basically bare. And the defence industrial base of Russia is still ramping up tremendously. They've got oil revenues paying for it all. So it doesn't look like a winning hand. Therefore, how do you create the circumstances where you end up with some form of peace? Now, I'm not entirely convinced that Putin will want to have that conversation. He certainly won't want to be bullied into it. And unless he feels he's won. So I think the answer is less about what Zelensky can stomach. It's more about what will need to be on the table for Putin to consider that actually it's worth his while stopping.
As this war winds down, in your mind, does this help or hurt President Zelensky at home? Are we going to have a Churchill effect post-1945?
I think it's very likely. And I was quite... So one of the questions I was asking when I was out in Ukraine, and it's not a big... I can't speak for the whole of Ukraine, but I thought I would go out and ask, what do they think of President Zelensky? And I was asking loads of people, barmen, all sorts. And I thought they'd all be resoundingly for him. And they looked at me quizzically. And I said, well, from outside, I know nothing about the politics, but this man has cometh the hour, cometh the man. He has stepped up. He's galvanised support internationally. And all of them just went, yeah, he's done that, but he doesn't get my vote.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be drawn on it. And so it is only a tiny dip test, but most wartime leaders struggle over time. That if he's a signal of the resilience of Ukraine, that's great.
Yes.
If he translates to being stubborn, when actually the mood of the country is, I've had enough. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying it's a really difficult time. And it may be I just spoke to the wrong people in Kyiv, but I very much sense he has done a fantastic job in very difficult circumstances. Whether he endures beyond this is a very different question.
Yeah. John, it's great to have you on Al Arabiya. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Shanghai. The most prosperous city in China, Shanghai. It is in fact the largest city, teeming with vigor and vitality. Shanghai may not be the typical destination, brimming with sightseeing venues, but it's definitely got a lot to offer an experience. For one, you can choose to cruise along the Huangpu River and stroll along the Bund. The Bund is known for its marvelous display of Shanghai's classic skyline views. You can also witness the rare treasures of the city at the Shanghai Museum. It has a vast collection of rare cultural relics, reaching up to 120,000 pieces on display. Most popular are its beautifully decorated bronzes, which reach up to 400 pieces. Want to see the city with a bird's eye view? Then head over the World Financial Center, the 5th tallest building in the world. It will give you the best elevated views in the Shanghai metropolitan. You can view the scenery from various floors, but a must-visit is the Skywalk, which is the world's highest observatory. This is perhaps the best spot you can be in the middle of Shanghai. It's definitely where you should be if you're watching the sunrise or the sunset. Now, for a dining experience you'll never forget, try the revolving restaurant at the famous Oriental Pearl TV Tower. The building is in fact an outstanding landmark, and the revolving hotel is a popular tourist destination. You can also view the Chinese metropolis from above through its space module, its highest observatory level set at 350 meters or 1,148 feet from above the ground. The attractive building has 3 legs, 11 spheres, and 15 observatory levels. Meanwhile, take a break from the city's modern wonders and stroll around in Zhujiajiao. Zhujiajiao Watertown offers a relaxing ambiance and view. You can opt to stroll around by foot or take the boat or a ferry ride to see and appreciate the rows of canals, bridges, and genius architecture in this old water town in Shanghai. One of the most popular is the Fangsheng Bridge. It is the largest arch bridge in Shanghai. Finally, complete your experience with a walking tour and shopping along Nanjing Road. It is the place to be to experience the hustle and bustle of Chinese trade.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme today, Lebanon focuses on filling a more than 2-year presidential vacancy. This as a ceasefire, described as fragile, takes effect. Reports of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah near border towns have sparked concerns of potential breaches of the truce. Israel steps up its bombing campaign in Gaza, killing dozens of people, even as calls for a ceasefire grow louder following on from the Lebanon deal. And Russia carries out another major attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving more than 1 million people without power. Hello and welcome to the programme. First of all, as Lebanon enters its second day of a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, the focus is now shifting to the country's vacant presidency. With the truce seen as a crucial opportunity, a parliamentary session, the first since June of last year, is going to be held next week to vote on a new president, with the final decision expected on the 9th of January. Well, Lebanon has been without a president since October 2022, with the deeply divided parliament failing to agree on a successor to Michel Aoun. Well, previous votes have been split between candidates Jihad Azur and Suleiman Frangieh, neither of whom secured enough support to win. Well, Lebanon's presidency is reserved for a Maronite Catholic, the premiership for a Sunni Muslim, and the Speaker of Parliament for a Shia Muslim. Well, in the absence of a president, authority rests with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Well, to discuss the potential end to Lebanon's political paralysis, we can cross to Beirut and speak now to Ghassan Hasbani, who is the former Lebanese Deputy Prime Minister and Public Health Minister. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, sir. You're currently MP for the Strong Republic bloc in the Lebanese Parliament. Your country, of course, has been without a president, as we've been saying, for more than 2 years. It's now been announced that this special session of Parliament will be held on the 9th of January to elect a new president. How significant do you regard this development as being?
Well, it's quite an important development because we have been asking for this session for more than 2 years. And we would hope that this session would actually be a full constitutional session. What does that mean? Because all the previous sessions were held as a single session, whereby the first round requires a supermajority of 86 votes for anyone to be elected president, while the second round would require only 64 plus 1 votes. But we never got to the second round. The Speaker, parliamentary bloc, and his allies, Hezbollah, have always walked out of the room, leaving the session without quorum in the second round. And we had multiple first rounds that have been called for, and this is why we never were able to get a president democratically elected in more than 2 years. So we're hoping that this will be a significant step and that they would stay in the room for a second, third round until we elect a suitable president to lead the country in the next phase.
OK, so who is that suitable president? Are there some candidates that you can see everyone rallying behind at this stage?
There are candidates that could rally people behind them. Some names are known, other names are still kind of in the development. We need somebody, more importantly than the name, we need somebody who can, first of all, this is a presidency for 6 years, not just for 1 year. So we need somebody who can establish stability and work with the Lebanese armed forces to implement the ceasefire and any further agreements and international UN resolutions fully and properly, because we cannot go back to what we were before the war. Secondly, a president capable of rallying the Lebanese people around a vision, around the constitution, able to rebuild the state system and rally people around the state, and at the same time be able to lead the country out of its economic downturn that we've been living through for more than 4 or 5 years now.
OK, so given what you've just described as being the profile of the perfect candidate and the circumstances in which Lebanon finds itself, would you say that the right person would be more likely to be a career politician, or do you think a technocrat would probably be the right person for this kind of a job?
Well, it's going to be a complex job. Definitely the right person is somebody who values the Constitution and would implement his oath on protecting and implementing the Constitution, somebody who understands the public sector workings because they need to hit the ground running, somebody who is respected internationally as well, because there's going to be a lot of engagement with the international community for the recovery, and someone who can at the same time understand economic issues and be able to lead the recovery plan together with the Prime Minister. So yes, there's going to be a technical background, a technocratic background, as well as somebody who understands also the workings of Lebanese politics. They could not just be parachuted into this position, and Lebanese public administration. All of these are criteria and important traits. However, more importantly, someone who's a sovereignist, who believes in the finality of the Lebanese state as it stands today on 10,452 square kilometers, somebody who would also uphold the constitution and be able to declare that and implement the fact in the constitution that no one carries arms but the Lebanese sovereign armed forces. And this is a starting point.
Okay, and I noticed you used the word his on one occasion there. It doesn't sound like you think there are any women candidates waiting in the wings.
At this point in time, I don't think there are any women candidates who have a serious chance of getting there, although we would hope that there will be more candidates coming forward with these qualifications and these commitments publicly made. We had asked, at least our bloc, that the next president should be clear about his or her position, but most likely it's going to be his because this is where most of the candidates are. But if it is her, that would be great. Position with respect to the implementation of UN resolutions. Now that we have a ceasefire agreement that enforces the implementation of UN Resolution 1701 and all the preceding resolutions, we do need a president that actually believes in that and capable of following it through.
Okay, and given, we're talking about a date of the 6th of January by which time a president might be agreed on. I mean, the situation Lebanon is in is extremely critical. And given these critical times, don't you think an emergency measure could be put in place so that this is done sooner? I mean, rather than waiting for another 6 weeks when the country needs leadership?
Absolutely. This is what we've been calling for. In fact, we called for it to be done 2 years ago. And throughout, we proposed candidates. We went to every single session and voted for a candidate. And we kept asking for a session to be held continuously, non-stop. So, we do hope if it happens, we would like it to happen today before tomorrow. But that's what the speaker decided on. We don't know the reasons behind that. He surprised us this morning. At least better late than never.
Okay, I mean, obviously the people of Lebanon have been through absolute hell the last 2 months or so. Aside from installing a new president, I mean, what do you think are the other main priorities for Lebanon's political class to ensure that Lebanon's 5 million people get the future that they deserve?
First of all, definitely forming a government, nominating a prime minister, forming a government very quickly, a government capable of managing and conducting all the reforms and the tough measures required for the reforms, instilling stability and ensuring stability on the military side so that no weapons will be present outside the sovereign armed forces and the authorized security forces. So basically this would be a dismantling of all armed militias, infrastructure, and recovery of any existing weapons across Lebanese territory. Thirdly, the priority would be to safeguard the borders and the Lebanese territory across all land, making sure that all borders are properly controlled, and to embark on a recovery plan for the country, economic recovery, social recovery, and a complete overhaul and restructuring of the public sector, reducing its size, corporatizing certain state-owned assets to improve their performance, and addressing the financial services sector problems and dealing with the depositors' money who are still waiting for the fate of their deposits after the crisis, then putting together and launching a full recovery initiative for the economy and fiscal policy.
Okay, so clearly lots needs to be done. I mean, one other thing that I'm wondering how you think this is going to be done. I mean, Hezbollah obviously isn't going anywhere. How do you think Lebanon decouples itself from Hezbollah and its grip on power and their apparent ability to hold the whole country hostage?
Well, we can't assume that Hezbollah is not going anywhere. Hezbollah is gone. Hezbollah, as we know it, as we have known it for 40 years, is no longer. Now we have a new set of options for Hezbollah. They either continue trying to rearm and fail in that and go against the international will and most of the Lebanese will, or they accept the fact that they can be part of a democracy like all other political parties and become a political party to play the role that is given to them by whoever wants to support them. And this is their right as a political party. But they need to be under the umbrella of the state, like everybody else, on an equal playing field. So this is not about decoupling. This country has tried to decouple itself from a paramilitary force that has existed for 40 years, and it hasn't happened. And this impossibility of decoupling led to the country collapsing economically and then collapsing militarily and socially, with billions of dollars in losses, more than $10 billion in this war, 45,000 houses destroyed, 100,000 damaged, more than 12,000 injured, and 4,000 killed. All of this is the cost of having this failure of decoupling or trying to decouple Hezbollah from the government without any results. Now, what happened has happened. Devastation has happened in Lebanon, but we should not let this go without any plan or any action to fix the situation for the future and never go back to the point we were at before the war.
Do you think Hezbollah is going to buy into that and play ball?
No, I don't think so. But this is not probably going to become a choice at some point in time. It's going to be a global will imposed on the situation. And most of the Lebanese want to move forward. The international community has put its weight to guarantee that, and we hope they act on it. The war, unfortunately, that nobody wanted and we had warned against many, many times before and called upon Hezbollah not to engage into a regional war, and they never listened. This war should not return. We hope it does not return. But it does seem that if Hezbollah is not compliant, this war might return and might go on. Lebanon has been given a chance by the sponsorship of the United States, France, and many other countries, and Arab countries as well. But this chance may be lost if Hezbollah keeps insisting on continuing the fight. The ceasefire decision or agreement is quite clear about the dismantling of all paramilitary infrastructure or military infrastructure outside the Lebanese armed forces, to disengage from any military acts and to collect any existing weapons and to prevent new weapons from entering the country or being manufactured in the country. The text is crystal clear, clearer than any UN resolution that we have seen so far. It is basically a practical and on-the-ground implementation and interpretation of all UN resolutions 1701, 1559, 1608, and others that have been written over many, many years.
I just want to ask you lastly, in a piece that was published on Al Arabiya's website by Makram Rabah, who is an assistant professor at AUB, perhaps you're familiar with his work, he said that the ceasefire deal was, quote, nothing short of a total capitulation to Israel's demands. Obviously, this deal was agreed to under duress by Lebanon. Do you think it was a good deal?
It depends on how you look at it, because a good deal would have been to implement 1701 and 1559 earlier this year before the war happened. We would have avoided a war, we would have avoided all the losses that I mentioned, and we would have actually had stability in the country, reaching a very honorable point where we are in harmony with UN resolutions and the international community and bringing back Lebanon to the place it should be in. The failure of implementing those resolutions and the refusal of Hezbollah to comply with those resolutions led us to doing this under fire. Unfortunately, no one can agree with having a war or putting this duress on the implementation. But again, the point of view of many neighboring countries now is shifting towards a more stable Middle East, and we need to be part of this more stable Middle East and stop the donkey shot approach to instability. So under duress or not, this is reality, and this has been the result of the war. The destruction that has happened to Lebanon led to this final decision, to which Hezbollah has actually agreed, and the Lebanese government has agreed. And if they do not wish to implement, then they will put us all back, all the Lebanese back, into a war situation.
And just before we say goodbye, I just want to ask you, Mr. Hasbani, on a personal note, how it feels to wake up every morning, as you have done for the last 2 mornings now, without the sound of drones, without the sound of planes, without the sound of shelling. How does that feel?
It feels very good. This is the country we want to live in. This is the country we want to have permanently. But it also is worrying because it is very fragile, this stability. We're cautious all the time. In fact, we did have certain bombings in the south already. So effectively, we don't feel yet that the war is really over. It really depends on how seriously Hezbollah takes this agreement in terms of implementation.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Ghassan Hasbani, thank you so much. So Lebanon has entered its second day of a ceasefire, but concerns remain, with reports indicating a potential breach on both sides. The IDF states that it has detained 4 Hezbollah members who approached Israeli troops in southern Lebanon. They also reported firing on several individuals they described as suspects, this in Mace al-Jabal. Meanwhile, the Lebanese news agency reported that 2 people had been injured in Israeli shelling in the Nabatea governorate. Well, despite Israeli warnings against movement beyond the Litani River, displaced Lebanese civilians are returning south, with some heading to villages where Israeli troops are still deployed. Well, let's cross back to Beirut now, and we can speak to Khalil Hello, who is a retired general in the Lebanese army. General Hello, it's great to have you back with us on Al Arabiya News.
Thank
you. In your opinion, is the third Israeli-Lebanese war really over, or is this merely a 60-day pause?
No, it's not over at all. And I remind everybody that the first war between Hezbollah and Israel occurred in 1993, the second one in 1996. Then we had the Israeli withdrawal in 2000, and then in 2006. And this is the 5th time we speak about a truce or a ceasefire. So as far as the ingredients of any war are still there, I mean, the Hezbollah armed branch and the Palestinian conflict, as far as these ingredients are there, and as far as Iran involves itself in Lebanon, I think that this truce will be fragile. And the first elements of this fragility, we saw them today and yesterday. Israel fired on what it considered a movement that are a breach to the ceasefire, where they said Hezbollah elements were moving south, or that Hezbollah elements were manipulating missiles, short-range missiles. So they targeted them. And yesterday, the Hezbollah speech in Lebanon by Hezbollah MP and Hezbollah ministers are of a concern, because we understood that they don't want to withdraw their weaponry from south of the Litani, and they were questioning about the efficiency of the deployment of the Lebanese army south. So all this raised concern that this is a truce that saw the light under pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, first of all, by the delay of the delivery of some important ammunition from the United States, because when this truce was announced, the U.S. announced that they will deliver for $620 million of ammunition to Israel, And the second thing is the arrest warrant against Netanyahu issued by the International Court that France said we give immunity to Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think that there was a bargain behind this truce. And when things are this way, I don't think it is serious. We may believe that this is a true ceasefire once for all when Hezbollah complies with the International Security Council Resolution 1701, 1558, and accept to give their weaponry to the Lebanese army according to this resolution. And when we find that Hezbollah complied, first of all, with the resolution 1701 without any pressure, then we can believe, then we may believe that this will be a real ceasefire and a real stability.
Yeah, I mean, General Hello, do you think they're likely to do that, Hezbollah? And, or do you think they're just going to use these 60 days to regroup and rebuild? And how is the Lebanese army going to play a part to make sure they don't do that?
Okay, now Hezbollah needed desperately this ceasefire because their strategy, number one, is to spare what remains of their military power. And their military power has been seriously degraded by Israel during 14 months of bombardment. And the second strategy of Hezbollah is to keep its strength and assertiveness in the Lebanese interior affairs. So Hezbollah during these 60 days will reorganize for sure, will try to rearm, but this is unlikely because Syria is the pathway to this rearmament. And it is now, it has been bombarded heavily by Israel, and even United States Air Force targeted some Iranian fractions in Syria that tried to fire on the US bases there. And today we have a huge battle in northern Syria where we are hearing about incursion of Turkish tanks toward Aleppo. So all these events converge toward one thing. It's a warning to the Syrian regime to stop funneling weaponry to Hezbollah. So Hezbollah will try to regroup, to reorganize. And unfortunately, I cannot tell about the Lebanese army because the Lebanese army received instructions to go South Lebanon and to start deploying there. And it effectively started deploying in the region of Marjayoun. But the government orders to the Lebanese army are not very clear. So I'm wondering if the Lebanese army encounters Hezbollah weaponry or try to seize it or to confiscate it, what may happen? So this is a real concern that I cannot predict for the time being. We better wait for the future days in order to have a better assessment of the situation.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, because it's quite confusing for people outside Lebanon to understand this, and it's really important. So we've got these 10,000 Lebanese army troops deployed to the south. If they see Hezbollah violating the terms of the truce, you're saying that the army doesn't really know how they're supposed to respond?
Yes. In principle, the army should seize all the weaponry and should kick out Hezbollah elements north to the Litani. But the attitude of the ministers of Hezbollah yesterday in the government, because, you know, our army follow the government. Our army is not a political independent institution. It is a tool in the hands of the Lebanese government that is vague regarding the implementation of the 1701. The prime minister and all the other ministers, they say they want to implement it. But the ministers of Hezbollah are taking a vague attitude toward this. So this is why I think that the Lebanese army should be very tough, should confiscate any weaponry south of the Litani in order to comply with the international resolution and to have the backing of the international community. So this is the main point. This is what should be done. But let's wait for the future days, for the next couple of days, to have the first tests about that.
Okay, so, I mean, it's not just the Lebanese army, is it? There's UNIFIL is there, and we've got the so-called tripartite mechanism, which is the US, France, and UNIFIL working together, plus the Lebanese army. They're all tasks they've got the same goal, which is to make the south of Lebanon safe, to make sure it doesn't pose a threat to neighbouring Israel, to make sure there aren't any violations, and to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't drag Lebanon into another war. Together, do you think they can do it?
Well, UNIFIL is in Lebanon under Chapter 6 of the UN. It is not a combat mission of UNIFIL. It's an observation mission. And the US and French observers that would help are not yet on the ground, I suppose. And these are only observers. These constitute an umbrella for the Lebanese army, an international umbrella to act in order to restore the Lebanese sovereignty in South Lebanon. All these are positive elements and are subjects of hope. But I still put a question mark on what will Hezbollah do. If Hezbollah is really in this government, and if Hezbollah really accepted all the deal, they should comply and withdraw without the use of force and without contact or without clashes with the Lebanese army. It didn't happen yet. And the Lebanese army didn't deploy yet in all the south. They deployed only in the area of Marja'yun, where Hezbollah withdrew. And I remind that this is a Christian area in South Lebanon where Hezbollah is not welcome. So let's wait and see the next days, as I said.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. General Khalil Hellu, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just as the dust is settling in Lebanon after the latest truce deal, Israel has stepped up its bombing campaign in Gaza, killing dozens of people. Well, the strikes have hit northern and southern areas of the enclave, including a refugee camp in Nuseirat. Well, the Israeli ground invasion expands deeper into Gazan territory with tanks in Rafah near the border with Egypt. Well, on the one hand, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is grappling with louder calls to implement a ceasefire in Gaza, while he is also battling a case in The Hague over war crimes allegations. Well, the Premier's office says it is going for an appeal at the International Criminal Court with a demand to delay the implementation of the ICC arrest warrant. Well, the statement also says that a rejection of the appeal would be perceived as bias against the state of Israel. Well, let's get more now, and we can speak to General Israel Ziv, who is a retired Major General and former head of the Israel Defense Forces Operations Directorate. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I'd just like to start by talking about what's happening on Israel's northern border in Lebanon. Israeli tanks reported to have fired at 6 areas of Lebanon within 2 kilometers of the Blue Line today. Just how serious do you think these violations of the truce have been?
Hi, Tom. Well, we knew that it will take kind of, first term to settle things down and to see, whether the Hezbollah is testing us or not. So it was expected, and I think we might see of that trials of, to check us in the next few weeks. But this is the reason why we gave for this settlement 2 months. The 2 months is kind of a testing time to see if Hezbollah stands on the demands and is really, withdrawing north to the Litani or not, and whether they are trying to fire at the Israeli forces over there. We'll see in the coming days and in the coming weeks what is going on.
Yeah, and of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu saying these 60 days are going to give Israel the chance to shift their focus to Iran, to refresh their forces, and also isolate Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I'm just wondering whether, though, in your opinion, this latest war between Israel and Hezbollah is over, or whether you see these 60 days as just being them pressing the pause button.
I think I would bet that it will be over. I think that the Hezbollah situation is very tough. He was hit very very seriously. Both his strategic level, his tactical level. Is not in a good operational condition, and definitely he needs that long time out to recover itself. And we need to do everything to prevent it, especially in the southern part of Lebanon, but also with the hope that the Lebanese army will take over the rest of the areas. By the way, according to Resolution 1701, and will be able to dismantle Hezbollah and maybe other groups from their arm. But the key issue is how in power is the Lebanese army. And I think that our agreement, it does not include specifically any means or intention, to take that part seriously. And without the Lebanese army to be, much stronger, it's kind of a reputation for what was already happening, because it's a weak army, it's not strong enough.
Sure, but it sounds as though, from what you were saying earlier, that as long as there are no major violations of the ceasefire agreement, we could have lasting peace at long last between Israel and Lebanon.
I think so, yes. All the conditions are there. Things needs to be seen in the field, in the territory. But I think that most chances is that, we're going to have a peaceful time for the next few years. This is my opinion.
So it sounds to me as though you think Prime Minister Netanyahu was right in agreeing to this ceasefire agreement. And I say this because there were some in Israel, and there was one notable voice in Prime Minister Netanyahu's inner circle who were very much against it, who called it a big mistake. But are you saying Prime Minister Netanyahu was right?
And not only he was right, I think we could have it already several weeks ago, and maybe even with better conditions. But definitely it is the right decision. We have to remember Israel is after 14 months of a very long fight. Actually, it's the longest war since the independence. And the attrition is also in our powers as well. So I think that, yes, it is about time not to last this war longer, but to cut it and to go for that resolution. But again, the key is not just the agreement between us and Lebanon. The key is how to enable Lebanon not just to hold, but to gain their own power, their own control, on Beirut, on other areas, because if Hezbollah is going to take over again Beirut, it means that he will go south. And if he will go south, to the mid-country, he will go south to the south of the country, and then we'll have the déjà vu, the same thing again as it was before.
Now, let's talk about the Israeli residents who live just close to that northern border. They haven't yet been able to return to their homes yet, I gather. But when do you think they could start doing that?
I think not sooner than the 2 months period. If the 2 months period is working well, and things are going in the right direction, I think that would be the right time to start bringing them back to their homes. But I don't think that we should do it, or it should happen earlier than that.
Okay, well, let's turn our eye now to Gaza, because, of course, a lot of people in Gaza saw what happened in Lebanon, a much shorter conflict than what they've endured. 14 months it's been in Gaza. 44,200 people have died. Today alone, at least 17 Palestinians were killed. And I'm just wondering why you think it's taking Israel such a long time to conclude its operation there.
I think that the government is not in unfortunately, it's not in a position to take the right decision. And the right decision should be to conclude the war over there, to bring back the hostages, and to take the Americans' offer to have a plan of policing the territory so it will not be rebuilt by the Hamas. But from political reasons, the government, is not going for that. While they are not taking the decision, the army has to, to kind of cut the grass. They need to go wherever the Hamas is rebuilding itself, and to dismantle those rebuildings, and that happened in Jabalia or in other places. Now they went to Rafah, and yes, unfortunately, every such operation, it meets uninvolved people as well, and this is not in any intention for that, but as long as there is no substantial decision of the government, the army has to maintain the area and prevent the Hamas from regaining power again.
So do you think there's any chance of a ceasefire in Gaza before President Biden leaves office, or would your prediction be that it's unlikely to happen before Donald Trump arrives at the White House?
I think that there are negotiations. Be honest with you, how serious they are, I don't know, because we have those negotiations before. And by the way, both sides, the Hamas and the Israeli government, were not willing, to pay the total price of that ceasefire, whatever it is, to each side. Now, I think there are better chances for that, because I see some more serious intentions of the Israeli government. But to be honest, I think that before Trump is coming to the White House, to his office, I'm not sure that any serious step will be taken in Gaza, unfortunately.
And just lastly, I'd like to get your opinion on the ICC decision to issue an arrest warrant for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, both men accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. And I'm just wondering, what do people in the ranks of the army there in Israel make of all of this?
Look, I think it's a very poor decision. And the pressure should be to establish an inquiry committee, a national inquiry committee in Israel. Israel has a very strong judicial system, and to put us together, or the Prime Minister, together with Sinwar or the Hamas leader on the same line, I think it's a very big mistake. It's a confusion between right and wrong. We have to remember, Israel did not invite itself to go into Gaza. And we all still remember, hopefully, what happened on October 7th, this vicious attack, terror attack on civilians. Now, with all the respect, this is a defense war of Israel against the Hamas. And if we take that rationale out of such a war, it's not just a problem for Israel. It's a problem all over the world that is trying, the liberal and world to fight against terror. So I think it was not the right thing to do, and it's nothing connected to Netanyahu or to Gallant, which, by the way, yes, they've made the mistakes and they try to correct it. But there are other ways trying to correct it and not, send him a subpoena to ICC.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us once again. General Israel Ziv, thank you so much. Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been hailing his country's new Oreshnik hypersonic missile, which he says turns everything into dust. Well, President Putin's comments come after last week's Oreshnik missile attack on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, which he admitted was in retaliation for Kyiv using longer-range Western missiles. Well, during the course of the last 24 hours, Russia has carried out attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving more than 1 million people without power. This as winter sets in. Well, for more, we can speak now to Alina Frolova, who is a former Deputy Minister of Defence for Ukraine and now Deputy Chair at the Centre for Defence Strategies. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've just seen the second big attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure this month. At least 1 million people, as we were saying, without power, and this as winter approaches. Do you think this is an attempt to dent morale, and is that working?
Well, obviously, what Putin is trying to do, it's like an escalated maximum before Trump will go into the office. So we did understand and we did plan that it would be like a multiple attacks at the energy infrastructure. But that's somehow, unfortunately, expected thing. And we think that this type of attacks will continue till the end of January.
But in terms of affecting morale?
Well, this is not the first winter in war. Last winter was not easy too. And I think that the Ukrainians are quite resilient now. We don't have actually any choice because we do understand that this is the war for our existence. So we are keeping high. We made a lot of preparation on like a private housing, and people made a lot of preparation how to keep up without heating and energy. I think that this is not something which can hit the morale of Ukrainians.
Yeah, this is in fact the 11th major attack by Russia on Ukraine's energy infrastructure this year. And I'm just wondering, typically, how quickly Ukraine can recover from damage like this. I mean, are they able to quickly repair a bombed-out substation, for example?
Surprisingly, it's very high, like a speed of recovery. However, this year it would be more difficult because last year we used a lot of resources for this recovery process. But usually it takes like 1-2 days, up to 3 days to stabilize, to reroute the electricity supply from very heated area to some kind of other resources. And then it can take like a few weeks then to stabilize the schedule for supplies and to go out for some normal scheduling. So like 2 days, it's usually 2-3 days to give the electricity in some points, but then stabilization takes a few weeks.
And is your understanding that attacks like this on civilian infrastructure, such as a power plant, does that constitute a war crime in your understanding?
Sure, yes, because in accordance with all the war laws and laws of different type, international and domestic, that's the war crimes. And we collecting all the evidence as usual. We have a lot of expertises demonstrating what kinds of weapons were used. And all that is like a one big file for the future, we hope, trial against Putin and Russia.
OK, let's talk about weaponry for a moment, because for the second time in less than a week, President Putin has said today on a trip to Kazakhstan that the Oreshnik hypersonic missile that's been used in Ukraine could be fitted with a nuclear warhead. And we're talking about a missile here that's got a top speed of 13,600 kilometers per hour. And I'm just wondering what message you think Moscow is trying to deliver by using this type of weapon.
From military point of view, it has absolutely no sense because, well, they use, for example, Iskanders, which also are carriers, potential carriers of nuclear weapons, and which can demonstrate now the more destructive power. But they became some kind of usual part of the war now. And I think that there is something which they try to tell with this Oreshnik usage, although this is like a old Soviet type, like a post-Soviet type development. It's not something which they invented now. So they try to demonstrate to Western countries and first of all to the United States that they are ready to escalate till the nuclear level, yes, and they try therefore to get the best position for future negotiations. Because again, from the military point of view, it has no sense to use it. It brings no such a destruction about which Putin was talking. So you saw that the enterprise factory, actually, which they hit it was this Oreshnik in Dnipro. It actually stayed almost untouched because they don't have any type of other heads on this weapon except nuclear, and they didn't use the nuclear. So that's only the political message, and this is message for more to our partners than to Ukraine.
Okay, so President Putin's claim that this weapon can turn everything to dust, you're dismissing that. And with regards to speculation that the attack in Dnipro with this type of weapon could be a prelude to some more heavy attacks on Kyiv, on the capital, do you think that's likely?
Yeah, I think it's likely that they will use some kind of this type of weapons to hit the Kyiv. At the same time, Kyiv is the biggest protected city. I mean, the hardest protection, air defense protection. That's first. And the second, actually, as I said, that, for example, this night we had like an attack on Ukraine, including Kyiv, with more than 100 missiles. And this is like quite a destructive attack, but still we're here and we operate and we didn't lose the government and we continue to fight and will continue to fight.
And you mentioned in your previous answer the talk of nuclear weaponry. Al Arabiya has done an exclusive interview with the former Russian president and the former prime minister of Russia, who's now the deputy chair of the Russian Security Council. I'm talking about Dmitry Medvedev. He told my colleague, Abdeljawad Al-Roshid, that the use of nuclear weapons by Russia would only ever be a last resort. Let's listen to what he said.
The use of nuclear weapons, according to our doctrine, it's a last resort. We don't wish that to happen at all. There are no lunatics in the Russian leadership. The president has clearly articulated his position when he adopted the new adjustments to nuclear deterrence by looking clearly at the situations in which a nuclear response could occur. These situations are a reality. The new foundations of nuclear deterrence, I mean the state's political doctrine on nuclear deterrence, made the threshold for using a nuclear weapon much lower to reflect the risks our country faces. Russia is at war with the entire Western world.
That was Dmitry Medvedev speaking exclusively to Al Arabiya. Fair to say that his rhetoric sounded a lot less alarming than quite a lot of the other rhetoric we've heard from the Kremlin, for example, last week.
Well, first of all, never trust Russians. Whatever they talk and whatever they speak about, this is never is a truth, even if this is signed doctrines or something like that. So you cannot rely on that. And for them, this is all like a big psychological operation. So one people are saying more alarming, another less alarming. So they try to keep some kind of open windows, small windows for negotiations. So I think that this is like all the well-coordinated operation of influence, and I won't rely on some serious words of Medvedev or someone else from Russia, including the Russian opposition, because they are like a part of one big game.
Okay, let's talk about what's happening on the battlefield itself. The war reported in recent months to have been going more in Russia's favor, I think it's fair to say. Ukraine has had more than a week, though, to use these US-supplied long-range missiles and British-supplied long-range missiles on Russian targets. What's your assessment of what's happening on the battlefield, and how much difference are those long-range weapons making to Ukraine?
The situation is difficult. It's really so, because we got actually an attrition war where Russia will potentially has better chances because of bigger numbers, bigger number of people, bigger number of highest economy, bigger number of weapons. However, we are not speaking about just the land war. So we need to look at the whole front line and political and geopolitical and military. And Russia is advancing only at one small piece of this front line, which, just to remind you, only land frontline clashes are at 1,500 kilometers. And we're speaking about like a spot of like 50 kilometers length. So that's like a very minor part of the front line. And just to remind you that also Ukrainian forces are doing operations at Ukrainian land in Kursk. So this is like some kind of fluctuation, natural fluctuation of the front line and nothing critical yet. And I think that we need to think about this like advance or not advance of Russia in complex vision. And Ukraine, as you rightly said, that we had only 1 week of using the long-range missiles, and what Ukraine is trying to reach to isolate the logistics, supplies, and critical infrastructure of Russian, military infrastructure of Russian, to broke up these like terms on the front line. I think we need more time for that, obviously, but I don't see yet the situation as a critical one for the course of war. I see the critical moments at some frontline spots.
Okay, and obviously President Zelensky continually calling on allies to speed up the delivery of weapons. I mean, do you think there's a concern in Kyiv that supplies are going to dry up under the Trump presidency?
There could be such a case, yes. So, and we do conscious about that. And I think that what like a Biden administration is trying now to make is to create some kind of reserve for the few months of the presidency, first months of the presidency of Trump, which makes sense with all these claims and clarity actually of the real politics which will be applied. And I think that anyway, we will have the gap in supplies after the Trump go into office, just because they need to reestablish all the processes, evaluate what they would like to do, what they don't want to do, and this reserve will make a good service for Ukraine. However, I do not expect that states will stop completely supplies. Anyway, they will be continuing. The issue is about what is the end goal and what the policy will be accepted by Trump. And plus, we have supplies, of course, from other partners which are increasing, and Ukrainian defense economy is rapidly developing, and with the financing which provided by our Nordic partners as for now for Ukrainian defense industry, we have some kind of contribution to cover those gaps which can possibly appear for the first months of Trump presidency.
And just lastly, before we go, and briefly, if you will, there are reports that the Biden administration there in Washington is urging Ukraine to drop the minimum age of conscription from 25 to 18. I'm just wondering if you think that's realistic and what Kyiv is saying about this.
For now on, it's not realistic in Ukraine because we still have a reserve of the higher age. From now on, just to remind you, 25 is the age which was established. And actually, we have a lot of reasons behind why not to do it to 18. But the only thing I would like to say that sometimes we're quite surprised that we're receiving a lot of tactical advices from our partners who don't have the, let's say, experience of such a war which we are having. So I think that we have our reasons to do so, and I don't think that the government and Zelensky will adopt this decision of 18 years for conscription.
Okay, well, thank you very much for speaking to us. Elena Frolova, thank you very much for your time. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for a wrap of the best interviews of the week. Until then, goodbye.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Mr. Gates, thanks for making the time, sir.
Good to talk to you.
Let's start with this new announcement you made here in Saudi Arabia. It's quite a large commitment that your foundation is doing in combination with the Saudi government. About 620 million?
That's right.
What prompted that collaboration?
Well, when I saw the Crown Prince last fall, I talked about the incredible effort to get rid of polio, to make sure no kid is ever paralyzed again. And I explained how that was a top priority for my foundation work, and he agreed to be a very strong partner. And so that's why the government announced 500 million of that will go over the next 5 years for polio eradication.
When you talk about a global threat like polio, what sort of difference will that kind of sum make, and which would be the areas in which you would target it?
Well, we have made a lot of progress with polio. We have 99% less cases than when the eradication started. But we still have polio in Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's never gotten to zero in those two countries. And it's spread back into Africa. And so our two challenges is to get it out of Africa while, for the first time, getting all the way to zero in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And that costs over $1 billion a year. And so if we do it well over these next 5 years, we'll be certified as the second major disease to be eradicated. Only smallpox has achieved that to date.
I was wondering, what was it about polio in particular that caught your attention first?
Well, polio is a terrible disease. You know, it paralyzes kids. And in a poor country, to be paralyzed like that it really is an awful thing. This eradication effort had started before the Gates Foundation was created. And it goes back to 1988 when Rotary, UNICEF, WHO, US CDC got together and said, let's go do this. As the effort was not going well around the year 2000, the Gates Foundation got involved. And now the three biggest donors are our foundation, the US government, and now Saudi Arabia.
And that's interesting because the collaboration in the region has really grown. I know through the Lives and Livelihoods project, the fund, you have already collaborated quite significantly with a lot of other countries in this particular region. And I'm wondering to what degree that's kind of showing countries in this region starting to realize they can step up to the mark.
Well, it's been a great experience with the Lives and Livelihood Fund #1. And because that works well now, we're all making commitments to the second round of that. You know, the Islamic Development Bank understands the Muslim countries. They understand how to deliver. Our foundation understands health and agriculture. And so we take the expertise, we bring it together, and we pick these high impact projects. So, you know, we're both excited to renew that work.
To what degree has that traditional model of the West largely being responsible for charity and donations switched now in real terms to have countries in the Middle East, to have countries in other parts of the world really get involved with collaboration? Are you really seeing that?
Well, I'd say that, you know, in terms of generosity, that's always been global. It's, you know, at the heart of the Christian and Muslim religion is that those who have a lot have a responsibility to give back. I'd say the new thing is to take this charitable money, whether from individuals or governments, and really be strategic, like creating a new vaccine or, you know, using a mapping approach to find all the children so we can get rid of polio and really measuring all the results. So with such limited money to help poor people, we have to make sure that it's being spent very, very well, both on health and education or all the things that can lift people up.
And I know there's a greater challenge. You don't get involved with political commentary, but what we do see in this day and age is some really severe impact of conflicts. We see what's happening in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Congo, 3 decades of that. These kind of conflicts, how much do they set back your effort to have some major impact?
Well, the conflicts are such a terrible thing. The loss of life, the destruction of property. It also means that the ongoing effort to help poor countries gets pushed down. Africa's got a lot of poor countries, but less money is going there as urgent issues around these conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine are now taking those very limited dollars. And so, yes, it's the goals that the world has set, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to miss those because of a combination of first the pandemic and now all of this instability.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was reading how when we did that very in-depth interview in March 2014 with Rolling Stone magazine, you gave your thoughts on a various bunch of issues, from climate change and philanthropy, the state of America, and you said innovation is the real driver of progress at that time, and that America is way better today than it's ever been. Now, considering what we've seen in terms of China making so much progress, especially in technology, the serious competition it's created for the US, and of course the current state of politics, would you still make that statement now?
Well, certainly China's done a lot of very impressive things in manufacturing, high-speed rail, but in terms of overall innovation, the U.S. is still unequaled. If you leave the country you're born in to go work with the best people in a subject area, mostly you're going to U.S. institutions. And so that's meant whether it's medicine or AI, the U.S. still has a lead there, even though these technologies, fortunately, get distributed globally and will benefit the entire world.
There's something else that caught me in that interview too. You said, asked about your greatest fear looking 50 years ahead. You said there will be some really bad things that will happen in the next 50 to 100 years, but hopefully none of them on the scale of, say, 1 million people that you wouldn't expect to die from a pandemic or nuclear or bioterrorism. And a few years, of course, later, we saw the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the estimates are nearly 3.5 million or something close to what it's taken. And I wonder how your views on the risks have changed when you look at that. I mean, you're fighting very hard to get that 1%, for example, with polio, and then you have all these other things that might be impinging on it.
Well, overall, the progress in health is phenomenal. Most people don't know we've gone from over 10 million children under 5 dying every year to now we're under 5 million. And so even though that's plateaued out with the pandemic and instabilities, it's something we can be very proud of. We got all these new vaccines out to the world's children, and that is the primary reason we were able to cut the death so much. Now we need to get back to cutting it in half again, but the financial situation, the instabilities meant that we're moving a lot more slowly than I would hope. I had predicted there was a risk of a pandemic, and sadly, that came true. We're past that. Now we need to get people working together in partnership and taking innovation and applying it to help the very poorest in the world.
And so much has changed in the past 2 decades, perhaps even the past few years in terms of media. Is the media, now we've got social media, of course, in the mix, is it your friend or enemy now?
Well, certainly I work with the media to get the good news out about how we've reduced deaths and where there's challenges. And, I want citizens of generous countries to feel proud of the work they're doing. Saudis should feel proud. Now they're on the polio eradication team. We need more of that generosity. And so the media is the way that we help people learn about it.
And of course, it's, you must get really frustrated with all the conspiracy theories. They just never seem to go. Do you think you'll ever get over those? They say, about vaccinations and chips and so on.
Well, up until the pandemic, I hadn't thought of that as a big phenomenon. I was completely taken by surprise at those conspiracies, and some of them centered on me, and some of them were, exactly the opposite of the truth. Vaccines have saved more lives than any other tool, and yet they came under attack.
Now, of course, there's little doubt about what you've achieved for the world in terms of technology and access for the average person to computing and computing power.
changed the relationship people have with computers, for example. Now, of course, we have AI on the scene. What are your regards with that? I mean, is it a risk that keeps you awake at night?
Well, AI is both the most promising and the most challenging advance humanity has ever made. A friend of mine, Mustafa Suleiman, wrote a book called The Coming Wave that, says that we can take advantage of this, improving health and education, but we have to make sure people with negative intent aren't taking these tools and using it for attacks.
You've managed to achieve something quite remarkable in this region now, getting people to come on board with the eradication of polio and paying attention to these issues. To what degree has your call for the super wealthy to really step up as well, to really make something with the resources they have, how well has that been responded to by these people?
Well, we have a number of people in this region who are members of the Giving Pledge, where you commit to give over half your wealth away. We don't have all the billionaires, so we need to work to convince them to come on board and find that their philanthropy can be super fulfilling and have a huge impact.
Is it possible to be too wealthy?
No, I feel lucky that I have so many resources, that we can go after very ambitious goals, malaria, TB, HIV, it's very fulfilling work.
The work you've done over the past 24 years since you started the foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you've spent about $50 billion, I think, now on health education, poverty alleviation, and so on. What do you feel personally is the biggest achievement of the foundation?
Well, certainly the work we've done in health. We helped create lots of new vaccines. We're founder of the Global Alliance for Vaccines that buys them for the children in the poor countries. We're founder of what's called the Global Fund that does amazing work on malaria, HIV, and TB. And so it's through collaborative efforts like that, or the coalition doing the polio eradication, that we've been able to have far greater impact than I ever expected we would.
Where does it go from here, Mr. Gates? So you've got the announcement now made. What are the next steps? What do you hope will happen next?
Well, it's great. Saudi Arabia and the other countries in this region are helping with our dialogue with Pakistan, Afghanistan, how we execute and get the vaccines out to all those kids. So we need to get this one done. It'll be a monumental event. Once we succeed, we'll go on to go after other diseases like measles and malaria, which are also quite horrific.
You seem to remain optimistic.
No, I'm definitely optimistic. We have innovation on our side. We have, human generosity, the fact that people do want to help other people. And so it's incredible work.
I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Delhi. India's capital, Delhi is known for its captivating sights and rich history. The city is beautified with mosques, forts, and monuments, and the popular landscaped gardens. There is a bustling Old Delhi and the well-planned New Delhi, each with their own attractions and both worth the exploration. One of the most popular in Delhi is the Jama Masjid Mosque. You must catch the breathtaking view of Old Delhi that you'll see from the top of the minaret in the mosque. The long and winding, strenuous climb to the stairs will all be worth it. The Jama Masjid is indeed a treasure of the old city and is the largest mosque in India. It was built in 1650 and in fact took 13 years to build. The Red Fort, Delhi's most famous monument, is one of the most popular remnants of the Mughal emperor's rule. It stands for a stretch of up to over 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles. It was built in 1638 to keep out invaders from entering the city. The Red Fort is a great way to see the very ancient historic side of the city. Another historical site worth a visit is Gandhi Smriti. It is where Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, was assassinated on January 30, 1948. The legendary man lived in the house for 144 days up until the time of his death. You can visit these places as they are open to the public. Historical feats aside, there are also many places in Delhi for sports, recreation, food, and shopping. There is also the Chandni Chowk, the main street of Old Delhi. It's a shocking contrast to the wide, orderly streets of New Delhi. Vehicles of all sorts crowd the space. With the pedestrians and animals, there are cars, cycle rickshaws, and hand-pulled carts everywhere you look. But the trip is worth the narrow, winding lines full of things to buy: affordable jewelry, fabrics, and electronics. Plus, you can also sample the local street food here. Last but not least, there are of course the famous Lodi Gardens. It's a fitting balance to the bustling city life in Old and New Delhi. It's a serene retreat from city life, a place to rest, reflect, and relieve yourself from a tiring trip. Tourists also visit to see the birds, eat along the restaurants, or simply enjoy the nature escape.
Our journey of the history of Arab manuscripts has taken us to the Far East, China, and the year 105 AD. A Chinese inventor named Cai Lun created a unique way of producing paper. He used worn rags, old ropes, and tree bark to produce paper. This paper would be known as al-Kaghid. The Chinese inventor Cai Lun prepared the first paste used to make paper from woven fabric. He sliced it up and mixed it with water, and then he would press the water out. He also prepared paste for paper out of hemp pulp, bamboo, and mulberry bark. The Japanese also used natural products to make paper. There are many stories about how paper arrived to Arab countries. However, most of them overlap with the possibility that in the summer of 134 Hijri, the Arabs captured some Chinese people in one of their battles in Central Asia and took them to Samarkand. These Chinese individuals knew how to make paper, and they taught the Arabs. Al-Kaghid is an Arabized word for paper. It is said to be a Persian word of origin, and there is a possibility that it is a Chinese word in origin. The manufacturing of Kaghid paper was very meticulous and took several days to finalize. White hemp, which is a fibrous plant, would have its threads and fibers extracted from its bark to manufacture paper. The hemp would be soaked in water, then combed down with a brush until it softens. Lime water is then added, which involves using a white substance prepared by heating limestones in special kilns. It is then left to cool and have the water drained from it. The water is used to soak the hemp for several nights. The soft fibers are pressed and placed under the sun to dry. At night, the fibers are returned to the lime water once again, and left again till the morning to be pressed once again. This process goes on for 3 or more nights, till the fibers whiten. They would replace the lime water twice a day. After the fibers would dry, they were cut with specialized tools. They were then soaked in fresh water for 7 days. And this water would be changed daily until the lime water residue would wash out. The fibers would be pressed delicately in a mortar and pestle, or moist, until they flatten out, and there were no knots left. The paste would be dissolved in a bit of clean water until it became similar to fine silk. Special wooden molds were made for the paper, depending on the requests of those who ordered them to be made. And it would contain many holes. The mold would be covered in water, and the paste would be placed on the mold. And it would be evened out by hand to have an equal thickness throughout the mold. The mold is inverted onto a wet wooden board, which it would stick to, and it would be left to dry until it would fall off on its own. The wooden board would be sprinkled with water, and once it dried up slightly, the first side of the paper would be coated with a hemp mixture. The first side is placed on a wooden board, and the other side is coated in the same manner. When soaking and starching al-kaghid paper, they would use rice starch after boiling and cooking it in a clean pot, draining it with a clean cloth, and using it to soak the paper. The more the process was repeated, the more aged and refined the paper would become. To color paper, they would add saffron to the starch solution, pour it into a bowl, and then gently dip the paper into the solution so that it would not crumble. The paper would then be dried on a fine thread in a shady area and flipped several times until it dries. It is finally polished with a glass polisher. This paper would be finally ready to be used. Paper is characterized by being lightweight, small in size, portable, and affordable. These factors made it a mainstay of expressing intellectual findings and thought. It was used in the art of calligraphy, especially in the Islamic East. All of this made al-kaghid paper a strong competitor to papyrus and parchment. The Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid ordered that people only write on al-kaghid paper, and that was because leathers were capable of being erased and reused, which made them susceptible to forgery. This is contrary to paper, which would be ruined if someone tried to erase something off of it. If a person tried to scrape or rub off something, then markings would be evident. In addition to its other advantages, paper was widely used in writing manuscripts. Despite the use of parchment attempting to hold on to its relevancy, it became one of the tools of scholars, commoners, students of knowledge, writers, merchants, papermakers, and those of prestige and power. Al-Jahiz said the following about paper: "It is sufficient for a person to carry a little bit of paper with their belongings and provisions due to how lightweight and small it is, unlike leather, which is heavier. If a person wanted to carry enough to last the duration of their travels, it would not suffice to carry a camel's worth." The Egyptian publishing house has one of the earliest books to be copied onto paper. It is a manuscript titled The Risala in Fiqh by al-Shafi'i, and it dates back to the beginning of the 3rd century Hijri. The oldest Arab manuscript written on paper, according to the latest data, is the Etiquette of Philosophy by the writer Hunayn bin Ishaq, who passed away in the year 260 Hijri. This manuscript is still preserved in the library of the University of Tehran, and it dates back to 249 Hijri. With the increase in demand for paper, the number of centers that produced it increased, and it was no longer confined to Samarkand or Baghdad. The paper industry reached Transoxiana, the Levant and Damascus, Tiberias, and Tripoli. Samarkand remained a central hub for the production of paper, and they continued to produce the finest and most premium types of paper. This new human invention and the drive Arabs had to produce it led to many forms of paper being developed, including al-Sulaymani, al-Talhi, al-Nuhi, al-Faruni, al-Jafari, and al-Tahri. All of these names were given in relation to the governor of the city in which the paper was made. The development of the paper industry, especially al-Kaghid, and its spread throughout Islamic countries, invigorated the production of written artworks and authorship, and helped it transcend into a new era. It was accompanied by a development in the markets of papermaking, scribes, calligraphy, and calligraphers. All of this changed the course of Arab manuscripts as they were elevated to a level with increased competition after the diversification and growth of this world that is full of art and intellectual creativity. This made us delve further into exploring the depths of our manuscripts to stand at the tools of the greats of our history as they explored, mastered, and created.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Toronto. Home to about 2.7 million people, Toronto is Canada's largest city, and the sprawling city filled with distinct neighborhoods offers a diverse mix of attractions to see, places to visit, and destinations to check out. Perhaps the most popular is the Niagara Falls, one of the 7 wonders of the world. A highly recommended way to see the famous falls is through the Maid of the Mist boat ride, which allows you to get right up close to it and immerse yourself in its enormity. Another popular site is the Dundas Square, often compared to New York's Times Square. The place is often used in the production of popular blockbuster hits because its setting is quite easy to film in. The city is also quite popular for its lineup of major art museums. The Art Gallery of Ontario, Toronto Gallery of Inuit Arts, and the Gardiner Museum of Ceramic Art makes Toronto a burgeoning art community. Great art alternatives can also be found lining the streets of Queen West, Ossington, Queen East, and the Distillery District. Every year, the art scene in Toronto is also taken over by contemporary artists during Nuit Blanche, an all-night arts festival that runs from dusk till dawn. You'll also want to walk by the Graffiti Alley in the Fashion District, Toronto's street that's legally tagged with an entire walking tour of murals by local street creatives. There's also the Distillery District, a cobblestone and usually carless street, featuring industrial houses that feature galleries, fashion designers, and arts and food products. Toronto is also host to an entire lineup of alternative dance and music fests. Some of the most popular include Digital Dreams, Electric Island, and Mad Decent Block Party. In June, travelers flock to the 17-day festival called Luminato. The Four Seasons Center for the Performing Arts is the place for opera and ballet shows. It is home to the Canadian Opera Company and the National Ballet of Canada. You may also want to try hiking or biking to the Toronto Islands nearby. It's just a ferry ride away. Plus, you'll get to see the city skyline at sunset. The sandy beaches are worth the trip, and the eclectic Wards Island is an interesting community to explore.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tapestries.